Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Naruto Destroyed the Otsutsuki clan. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Humanity. Earth's most inventive and obstinate descendants were also its most vicious creatures, with an unbreakable will to constantly strive for something bigger than themselves. Their insatiable desire for more drove them to engage in internal strife, which only grew more deadly as humanity discovered chakra. What the Sage of Six Paths had initially envisioned as a force that would unite humanity instead became a weapon of destruction that they freely used against one another. From the Blood Feud Wars, which were initiated by the sons of the Sage of Six Paths, to the Clan Wars era, which lasted for a millennium and eventually turned into the Great Ninja Wars, shinobi clans banded together under the banner of several secret military villages that were answerable to feudal lords seeking to increase their own power in response to humanity's desire for more. Until the carnage became too great, even for the merciless heirs of Earth, many more generations of humanity's offspring were buried and bloodied in those wars. After shinobi rebelled against feudal daimyos who exploited them in their never-ending wars, the insurrection wars ensued. 3 decades later, when the dust finally settled, humanity was completely worn out. The survivors' hearts were scarred by the loss of so many, and ruin ensued for decades until humanity discovered a truth that would permanently alter its course. They discovered their fate. The ruthless sons and daughters of Earth discovered the sinister origins of the chakra power they had so ruthlessly employed in the ancient writings of the Sage of Six Paths, which were discovered by a group of shinobi researchers who were looking for the history of the origins of their power. And those who wanted their world, their power, and everything else for themselves. The Otsutsuki. Many people didn't think that such other earthly creatures could ever exist, and they didn't think that the godly power they possessed could change not just a world, but the larger universe, which they had just discovered existed. However, a few living veterans from earlier conflicts agreed to the disclosures and made the decision to follow the sage's ominous advice to get ready for the threat in the only way they knew how. Then came the Unification War, in which the shinobi, now with a newfound sense of purpose, battled to bring humanity together under one banner. As the unified shinobi alliance took complete control of Earth, the objective was ultimately accomplished at the cost of innumerable lives and devastation. For once, they learned from the past, embraced a democratic system of civilian governance to genuinely unite all, and spent the ensuing centuries working to improve their species. They eventually made it to the moon, a goal that many generations of their ancestors had only ever dreamed of thanks to scientific advancements and the power of chakra. Humanity's desire for more, however, did not stop there. Soon after, it left its homeworld to settle on an increasing number of livable planets, with shinobi spearheading the exploration and conquest of these new worlds. They came across similar chakra origins in some of those worlds at the hands of the Otsutsuki, which only made them more convinced that the enemy was real and would eventually attack them, as the Sage of Six Paths and his mother, who were from the same clan, had predicted. Ultimately, the unified shinobi alliance evolved into the Terran Federation, which was tasked with defending Earth and its more than 500 colonies, outposts on asteroids in the Orion Belt, and remote settlements. But as time went on and they continued to conquer new worlds, humanity lost sight of the reason they had come together and started fighting among themselves once more, until the threat finally came to them and sealed their doom. Respected by his peers and adored by the majority of his people, Hashirama Senju had been the undisputed leader of the Terran Federation for over 5 years. He felt obligated to continue improving humanity's standing in the galaxy, something his ancestors had given up so much for. His job was getting harder every day because he was powerless to stop humanity from doing what they had been good at since the beginning. War. As Hashirama read the latest casualty reports from the civil war encompassing their race at the moment, she realized that whoever had dreamed that the conquest of stars would finally unite their race till eternity would have received a stern reprimand from the leader of humanity if the idiot had ever been caught. With sadness, he moaned, "Will this madness ever end? Not until you thoroughly annihilate the scum who dare raise arms against their own kind, old friend." When Hashirama turned to face the person who had issued such a harsh command, he saw a man his own age wearing the uniform of the Supreme Commander of the Terran Federation's military. One who was a brother in all but blood and a friend from his youth. "Madara, these are our people who are being led astray by foul elements in society. We need to use words, not more violence. How much more blood shall we shed?" Hashirama took the question seriously. "We don't negotiate with terrorists who kill non-combatants to seek independence from Earth and the Terran Federation. We kill them," reminded Madara with fury. Hashirama angrily questioned, "We have fought these wars for 3 years already and lost millions. The problem is not getting resolved with more war. When will you understand that?" His old friend gave him an equally obstinate glare. "That's because you don't let our military do its job fully. We need to raise 1 or 2 insurrectionists' worlds to make them see the writing on the wall." "Absolutely not." Madara was astounded by his leader's uncompromising response and the icy resolve in his eyes that dared him to disobey his orders. Hashirama's adjutant entered the room and sought their attention before they could continue their argument. The veteran shinobi in front of her were only braced for even more bad news by the horrified expression on her face as she carried a datapad. "What is it, Ikumi? I told you already we were not to be disturbed unless an emergency has happened," Hashirama calmly replied. To her credit, the brunette remained composed despite Madara's glare and Hashirama's question. "It is one, Lord Hashirama. The world of Honshu, it's gone." Even the normally composed supreme commander of their military appeared stunned at what she said, and even as she handed the datapad to the 2 men while fighting back tears, Hashirama's face seemed to lose all color. Their hearts sank as they gazed upon one of humanity's most distant colonies in the galaxy. There used to be a flourishing world with mountains, forests, and oceans, and a resolute group of people who settled on different continents to start over, but now there is only devastation. The world had died. Whole continents that had once been vibrant and beautiful were now completely barren. A story of complete devastation. Forests had withered away, ash-colored fields had replaced lush green pastures, and oceans had evaporated, leaving behind enormous craters all over the planet. The planet's very life had been sucked out, and there was no trace of the local flora, docile animals, or human occupants that had once roamed its surface. Hashirama asked wearily, "Where are the Navy ships and local army garrison we had deployed to protect such new worlds?" But when he saw Madara close his eyes, he already knew the answer deep down. As she led the 2 human leaders to the final video sent by the destroyed ship, Ikumi reported solemnly, "They were annihilated completely, Lord Hashirama. Only battleship Yamamoto survived long enough to send us an urgent message and these footages before it too was destroyed." Madara and Hashirama watched in horror as a video clip from the wrecked battleship was played for them. As his ship was hit by deadly explosions everywhere and the crew screamed in alarm, they saw the grim recording of the message on the face of an elderly, balding man in his late 40s, dressed in the standard Terran Navy uniform and wearing the insignia of captain. "To all Terran forces, this is Captain Shiki Aburame of Task Force Sirius. On the 24th of August 12.15 Galactic Standard Time, the world of Honshu came under attack from unknown enemy forces. They came out of nowhere and laid waste to many of our ships immediately. Attempts to identify them proved unsuccessful until the enemy sent us a message." Hashirama froze and Madara grimaced as the captain typed something on his datapad that played a feed. Because before them was the face of a creature that resembled a human but was also entirely different. It had the pale white eyes of a Byakugan and the body of a man with twin horns protruding from his head. He appeared to be standing in some sort of astral projection, wearing white robes, and had long blue hair that stood out sharply against his own pale skin. "To the vermin who have dared pollute our nursery with your filth, consider this a declaration of war from the Otsutsuki clan. We will cleanse this galaxy of your kind and erase the mistake of the traitor Kagaya." The projection came to an end when the 2 greatest human leaders saw the somber and resigned face of Captain Shiki Aburame. "Our naval task force is destroyed. My ship is the last one standing but has suffered critical damage, rendering us incapable of escape. Our ancient enemy has already landed on the colony and it's a one-sided slaughter. We will try to hold off the enemy force for as long as we can to give you time and leave a stealth satellite in orbit to give you any intelligence before we are annihilated. For Earth and humanity," relayed the doomed captain faithfully, as he gave final salute before the feed disappeared. Hashirama watched in sorrow as an armada 4 times their size soon destroyed the last human ship. However, the covert satellite they left behind captured the destruction of one of their worlds and all of its inhabitants in real time. Hordes upon hordes of enemy creatures from various new species descended upon the planet, and they witnessed a massacre unlike any they had ever witnessed, led by a small group of Otsutsuki. Before the Otsutsuki forces carried out a protracted ritual that began sucking away the planet's very essence and life, no mercy or quarter was shown, not even to innocent children who were killed alongside their parents and elders. "I've seen enough." Ikumi stopped the feed in response to Madara's severe order, and the supreme commander of their military gave Hashirama a serious look. With hesitation, Hashirama murmured, "So it has come to pass. The enemy has arrived, Hashirama. And we are not ready for them. We need to get our house in order fast as Honshu is just the first of the worlds to fall. Do I have your permission to do what's necessary? Madara was serious. Knowing exactly what his old friend and military leader meant by those words, Hashirama clenched his fist. Humanity would have to band together once more or face extinction at the hands of their real enemy, who would not spare them any time. He nodded reluctantly and wearily, signaling the start of the bloodiest war humanity would ever wage. It was the start of the Otsutsuki Wars. 10 years later, Earth. Standing solemnly in a military cemetery was Hashirama Senju. His dark suit complemented the hues of the thousands of mourners gathered around him. The 7th Battalion, 105th Shock Troopers Division, their most deadly special forces and the best defenders of humanity, lost loved ones and families in the incident. He could only feel his heart fading further as he observed the hundreds and hundreds of recently constructed graves of 7th Battalion members. His heart grew more and more enraged at the Otsutsuki as he gazed at the grave in front of him. Minato Namikaze, Lieutenant Colonel. He could still clearly recall the brilliant, strong young man he had met a few times, one of the youngest to be promoted to command a well-established battalion such as the 7th Shock Troopers. He was identical to his wife, Captain Kushina Uzumaki, in that regard. She had also been a promising captain of the 5th Fleet and a fine naval officer. Both were now interred next to each other as Hashirama's wife Mito comforted their weeping 8-year-old son. Hashirama could see in young Naruto's eyes that losing both parents at once could break a child's heart, as losing one parent was devastating for a young child. However, it had not been a pointless sacrifice. Humanity had won its first battle after over 10 years and the loss of almost half of its colonies. The industrial world had been the next casualty of the Otsutsuki's genocidal war, which had taken place in the Daedalus sector of the colony world of Freedom. The Terran Federation's supreme military commander had responded swiftly to the news. After losing ship after ship, world after world, and millions of soldiers and sailors, Madara Uchiha had been resentful. He sent the 5th Fleet to repel or destroy the Otsutsuki armada that had come to destroy the colony of Freedom because he was determined to give humanity its first victory against all odds. One of their best fleets, the 5th had shown great performance in previous engagements. It had fought the enemy fleet to save their colony under the leadership of Admiral Tobarama Senju, Hashirama's own younger brother. Since Freedom was the only remaining outer colony after the Otsutsuki destroyed the others over the previous 10 years, it was not just any colony world. The inner colonies and eventually Earth would also be subject to genocide if they were not stopped there. The entire Federation leadership, including Hashirama and Madara, was committed to halting the enemy's unrelenting advance. Under Admiral Tobarama's command, the 5th Fleet had engaged the enemy navy in space, but the Army's 105th Shock Troopers Division and 9th Armored Division were sent to the planet to rid it of enemy ground forces. Supported by the Army's 9th Armored Division, the 105th Shock Troopers Division's numerous battalions of their best special forces had spearheaded the assault against fierce enemy resistance throughout the 3 continents of Freedom. They were able to seize control of 2 of the colony's 3 continents after a great deal of sacrifice and hard fighting. There was only one left. After the Otsutsuki arrived on the planet, all previous communication with the continent of Meta was lost, and it was unknown how the people and military forces there were doing. More concerning was the fact that they were unable to keep an eye on anything on the continent because the Otsutsuki had used a camouflage technique that confused their recon units and satellites whenever they attempted to look into it. It had practically turned into a pitch-black area. The Otsutsuki and the slave species they used as cannon fodder in the war were examples of an advanced civilization whose technology and chakra mastery far outstripped humanity's. They had to suffer 3 losses for every Otsutsuki ship that was destroyed. They lost 20 of their best foot soldiers for every Otsutsuki clan member. Their creation of a dark zone over the continent of Meta was another example of this terrible display of power disparity. As a result of his involvement with the enemy fleet, Admiral Tobarama suffered terrible losses of his own, including the loss of Naruto's mother's ship. When confronted with an Otsutsuki dreadnought-class ship, Captain Kushina Uzumaki's cruiser-class ship, the Akagi, was subjected to deadly fire. The bigger and more deadly enemy ship crippled Kushina's own ship and mercilessly destroyed her escort of destroyers and corvettes. With her ship on the verge of destruction, Kushina made a choice that would change the outcome of the entire conflict and the lives of her crew and herself. Admiral Tobarama had shared a video feed with Hashirama that replayed his conversation with the young female captain, and he could still clearly remember it. With a resigned yet determined tone, she had said, "Admiral Tobarama, my ship is nearly finished. Permission to arm nuclear warheads and lead a kamikaze attack on the enemy dreadnought?" Admiral Tobarama had questioned in his customary stoic tone, "Captain Uzumaki, you are certain of success? 40% of our fleet is gone. If we don't take out the dreadnought, which is their flagship, more will follow. If the fleet is destroyed, our ground forces across the colony will also be wiped out, including my husband down there. My son will not lose both parents today, and neither shall humanity suffer another defeat. I'll make sure of that." Kushina had responded decisively, causing Tobarama to sorrowfully. Tobarama whispered back, "Then go and win, Captain Uzumaki. Show the Otsutsuki what humanity's wrath truly means." As she gave a final salute, a bittersweet smile appeared on her face, and Hashirama's brother sincerely returned the salute. "Any last message for your family?" Tobarama asked in a serious tone, which at last caused the young captain to lose her cool as her eyes started to get a little teary as her mind began to wander to her family. Admiral Tobarama nodded when Kushina sadly replied, "Tell my husband to look after our son and that I love them both." After saying those last words, the captain of the Akagi armed the dozens of Shiva nuclear warheads in her belly and steered her collapsing ship directly at the enemy's flagship dreadnought. While the rest of the human fleet backed their sister ship's last charge, Hashirama had been watching the video feed. To their credit, the enemy recognized the threat and attempted to destroy Kushina's ship before it reached its intended target. However, it was too late. The Akagi smashed directly into the enemy dreadnought's port before exploding into a miniature supernova that destroyed the Otsutsuki's flagship and a number of other enemy ships in the area. As the remainder of the Fifth Fleet rushed in to complete the opening that Captain Kushina and her crew had given them at the cost of their lives, Admiral Tobarama took advantage of the dangerous gap in the enemy's formation created by the loss of the flagship and the support ships that surrounded it. If their ground forces hadn't won another crucial victory over the colony, their sacrifice would have been in vain. Recon units from the 9th Armored Division and the 105th Shock Troopers Division encountered a reality that would undoubtedly result in their destruction and defeat when they first arrived on the continent of Meta. An entire enemy fleet and armies larger than those in space and the other two conquered continents were concealed inside the camouflaged continent. For whatever sadistic motives, the Otsutsuki had been playing with them, making them believe they were winning and willing to sacrifice thousands of their own in the process. They desired to preserve their actual resources for the final blow while allowing humanity to pound its fighting strength. They failed to account for humanity's unwavering determination to prevail at all costs. Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze and his 7th Battalion of Shock Troopers, along with the Army's 9th Armored Division, volunteered for a last mission without knowing of his wife's valiant death in space. The 105th Shock Troopers Division's commander, Brigadier General A, sent an after-action video feed that vividly described what had happened. Brigadier General A had asked gravely, "You're sure about this, Minato?" The ferocious older dark-skinned man in his 40s, who was from the nation of lightning on Earth, appeared solemn for once. "Yes, sir. If we don't eliminate this armada, all of us are dead. The 9th Armor will support our advance while my shock troopers from the 7th Battalion lead the charge to the heart of their base of operations. We will destroy them with a series of Shiva nuclear warheads. I have discussed the situation with my men and asked for volunteers only to accompany on this mission," replied Minato calmly. "How many answered the call and they understand that this is a one-way trip?" saddened A. "We all make it sooner or later, sir. My shinobi know the score, all of them have volunteered. The 7th Battalion will do its duty," Minato had responded with sadness. "You're one of my best commanders and the 7th is the crown jewel of the 105th Division," said A with sadness. "That's why we can get the job done." The Brigadier General, defeated and left with no choice, had nodded his approval solemnly, receiving a final salute from Minato and final words that still rang in Hashirama's heart. "Tell them to make this count." Hashirama had personally witnessed the feats of Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze's audacious land invasion of the continent. As promised, the 7th Battalion of Shock Troopers demonstrated their abilities by forging a brutal route through enemy territory with the help of the 9th Armored Division. Admiral Tobarama's small task force of naval ships gave them air cover and diverted the Otsutsuki fleet to buy time. Even though entire companies had been destroyed in their attempt to reach the enemy's base of operations, Minato and his men persisted because they knew they would not return. The majority of the Army's 9th Armored Division and the majority of the 7th Shock Troopers Battalion were destroyed by the time they arrived at their objective. An entire company of Otsutsuki themselves, backed by thousands and thousands of their slave species, waited for the remaining human forces. After that, there was a historic ground battle that Hashirama had never witnessed in his life. As they ripped into one another, neither side gave the other any leeway. As the last of the human soldiers arrived at their destination and performed their duties, Minato took the lead and personally killed dozens of Otsutsuki fighters before dealing the enemy their fatal blow. Every enemy soldier, ship, base, and supply was consumed in the flaming flames as dozens of Shiva nuclear warheads exploded across the continent of Meta. As Admiral Tobarama and the remaining Fifth Fleet destroyed the remaining enemy ships in space, the Otsutsuki's games and arrogance had cost them dearly. Humanity had triumphed over its doomed foe for the first time in 10 years. In front of Hashirama, however, were hundreds of empty graves of 7th Battalion soldiers, their bodies gone in the raging nuclear conflagration in which they had engulfed their adversary. Even after their initial defeat, the Fifth Fleet had lost half of its ships and men, demonstrating the strength of their adversary. As young Naruto sobbed in front of his parents' graves, Hashirama watched his wife Mito comfort him. To speak to the group of distraught families gathered in front of him, the head of the Terran Federation moved forward to stand next to the graves of Minato and Kushina. It didn't take long for the colony of freedom to fall. Our enemy was ruthless, but they underestimated us. The heroes in front of us today jumped into the flames of hell to save their fellow human beings. For the sake of all of us, they made the ultimate sacrifice in blood, Hashirama honestly said. He saw Naruto staring at him with sincerity and realized that what he had said today might help the young child, as well as all the bereaved people around them, find some purpose in their life. The leader of the Terran Federation stated candidly and resolutely, while our heroes laid down their lives, they showed us the Otsutsuki can be defeated. They proved we can win this war. Every victory we achieve from here on will be built upon the foundation of their sacrifice. One day, we will have a future to look forward to without the threat of the Otsutsuki, and it will be because these heroes showed us the way. His words gave many people, including young Naruto, hope. Mito Uzumaki finally shed her own tears over the fate of her departed cousin and her young son, whom she was holding in her arms, when the head of the Senju clan placed his hand on Kushina's gravestone. Kushina was family to me, as was Minato and everyone buried here. They entrusted all of us to see this war through. Will you follow me to the end? Hashirama was serious. Hashirama had never anticipated that young Naruto would be the first person to volunteer, coming forward to salute him out of everyone in the crowd. I will. Madara Uchiha had viewed the satellite feeds of the ceremony conducted by Hashirama. Madara had a different perspective, even though his childhood friend had been skilled at boosting spirits and had never given up hope following their initial triumph over the Otsutsuki. Because Madara had been shown a different reality by a man standing in front of him. According to Admiral Orochimaru, the head of the Office of Naval Intelligence, the colony of freedom will have to be evacuated eventually. Lord Madara. The Otsutsuki will retaliate with greater vengeance sooner or later. Holding this colony will waste more lives. Knowing that the Fifth Fleet and its accompanying ground forces had suffered losses, Madara said impatiently, "Tell me something I am not already aware of, Admiral." This was a harsh reality he had wished to avoid but had to face anyhow. Orochimaru stated bluntly, without regard for the soldiers and sailors who had to pay the price for this achievement, we are losing worlds, resources, populations, and our military forces at a horrifying rate. According to my department's current analysis, the Otsutsuki will destroy most of the inner colonies in the next 10 years before nearing Earth itself. We need to turn this around fast. It was nothing out of the ordinary for the heartless man whom many viewed as a monster, but humanity needed him in this war of genocidal aggression. With a weary sigh, Madara asked, "Do you have any solutions?" Orochimaru's pale face broke into a chilly grin as he showed Madara a folder, an actual piece of paper, much to Madara's surprise. The first words on the folder were observed by the Terran Federation's Supreme Commander. Red Flag Operation. Madara looked at Orochimaru with a look of shock and indignation on his face as he read the proposal inside, which caused the hair on the back of his neck to stand on end. Madara angrily snarled, "Hashirama will never approve of this, and you are a fool for even bringing this atrocity before me." To his credit, Orochimaru didn't even bat an eyelid despite sensing Madara's murderous intent rising toward him. Orochimaru calmly responded, "You ask me what will turn the tide in our favor truly, Operation Red Flag is the answer." "You fool. Those beasts were kept isolated for a reason. If the enemy captures them, our defeat will only be expedited," cautioned Madara. "It's already expedited, Supreme Commander. Half of our colonies are gone. Very soon the inner colonies will face their wrath, and no amount of propaganda or information manipulation from my department will be enough to prevent crushing the population's morale then. Once that happens, we are truly done." Orochimaru serious, and looked directly at Madara's. The leader of the Uchiha clan clenched his jaw and resisted the urge to choke the brash brat in front of him with every fiber in his body. Nevertheless, it was impossible to overlook the man's acrid facts. As Madara leaned back in his seat, Orochimaru concealed a gratified smile as his resolve and anger turned to bitterness. This program will not only allow us to beat the enemy but also take the fight to them. I am willing to take full responsibility for it and any consequences that shall follow, said Orochimaru with seriousness. Madara sighed wearily and said, Hashirama will never agree no matter what argument you make. Then it's best I came to you, Supreme Commander. Let Operation Red Flag be a covert initiative carried out by the Office of Naval Intelligence in secrecy. When the time comes for its revelation, I will take responsibility for it with Lord Hashirama. But I am certain my results will outweigh the cost, said Orochimaru with assurance. I will have no part in this, but I also cannot deny the reality of this war. Do what you have to but know you are risking your own life if you go ahead, sternly advised Madara. The Supreme Commander sighed in exhaustion as Orochimaru blankly replied, Aren't we all, sir? Madara inquired, What candidates do you have in mind? Orochimaru caught a glimpse of the video feed that the Supreme Commander had been watching with him earlier. More precisely, the figure of a young child who, in spite of the worst loss of his life, stood resolute and saluted with pride in front of Hashirama Senju. He saw a cry for vengeance and an unwavering resolve in those blue eyes that blazed in every human heart. I can think of a few volunteers, sir. For over 10 years, Lieutenant Kabuto Yakushi had been employed at the Office of Naval Intelligence. He was originally the son of insurrectionists who had led the uprising against the Terran Federation on the Red Dawn colony. After his parents and all of their rebel supporters were put to death, he was eventually adopted by the most dangerous and covert organization within the Terran Federation. He was not killed right away, unlike his parents, for reasons that were revealed later. He was given the name Kabuto Yakushi because he was too young, barely old enough to recall his own given name. He was destined to participate in Operation Red Flag. He was amused by the organization he worked for's cunning and deceit against the only legitimate government in the world as he strolled through the corridors of the Corvette Eridanus. Hashirama Senju envisioned that many people in Oni would be put to death by firing squad or worse if the civilian government ever found out how far the office had gone. With the new phase of Operation Red Flag set to begin, Admiral Orochimaru had truly crossed an even more perilous line. Despite what Supreme Commander Madara Uchiha thought, the Office of Naval Intelligence had already conducted Operation Red Flag almost 10 years prior. Or it had been in its first phase. The officers and other staff members of the same office gave Kabuto a wide berth and terrified looks as he passed through the ship's corridors because no one wanted to be confronted by an Anbu Black Ops employee. Kabuto was aware of the irony that Admiral Orochimaru had formed the agency's hit squad and personal assassination team from young insurrectionist orphans like him. Their many responsibilities included killing anyone who posed a threat to the agency or humanity, obtaining and manipulating information, kidnapping, torturing, searching for and apprehending missing personnel or traitors, which frequently devolved into manhunts and a number of other notable crimes. Everything to uphold and enhance the office's reputation and awe in the eyes of the public, including the human government. They were the daggers that Oni kept hidden in the dark, prepared to be slashed at any time against their adversaries, regardless of whether they were fighting for the same flag. For the benefit of the office, they lived in darkness and would eventually perish there. The same organization now sought to begin Operation Red Flag's second phase. But rather than using shady ultra-assassins to carry out its orders, the office sought to develop WMDs in order to defeat their genocidal foe, the Otsutsuki. Kabuto didn't criticize the logic because anyone with even a modicum of intelligence could see that humanity would ultimately lose this war and go extinct. As Lord Hashirama had so boldly declared, the recent victory at the Colony of Freedom was the exception rather than the rule. The Senju clan leader was undoubtedly a decent man who could easily maintain order among the civilians, but he was unaware of the fact that their numbers were constantly declining as the enemy took over more and more worlds. Not all humans in the galaxy were born with the capacity to use chakra. Less than half of them were able to use their most powerful ability, and even fewer were deserving of fighting against an enemy such as the Otsutsuki and their army of genocidal slave races. Few people were even as strong as the valiant Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze, who had defeated dozens of Otsutsuki in a single battle. However, the Navy's shock troopers were composed of elite shinobi, while the remaining weaklings with limited chakra-using skills were dispersed throughout the Army, Marines, Navy, and Air Forces, along with the millions and millions of civilians who wanted to defend their race with equal fervor. The harsh reality was that the civilians and weaker shinobi could hardly protect their colonies from the Otsutsuki slave races, and occasionally, as an exception, from the parasitic clan, albeit at the terrible expense of terrible casualties. If only that loyalty could be translated into fighting skills against the enemy. Humanity would run out of competent shinobi to throw at their enemy in the next 10 to 12 years, and by the end of the 15 years, they would have none left at the current rate of their losses. This is assuming they live that long. For this reason, the Spartan project, the second stage of Operation Red Flag, was crucial to the survival of humanity. No matter how heinous the methods, the Office of Naval Intelligence's treatment of orphans like Kabuto and their transformation into their personal weapons would have appalled most ordinary people, but it was a necessary sacrifice to keep humanity alive and united. That was the reason he hardly hesitated to join a mission that would subject more defenseless children to twice the agony and horror he experienced. Every Anbu serving in Oni lived and died without hesitation under the mottos of self-sacrifice and victory at all costs. He soon entered the office of the man who had permanently changed his life, and he was smiling with satisfaction as Captain Nono Yakushi stood obediently by his side. Loyally, Kabuto saluted the head of the agency and his scientist Proto-Copyright Ga Copyright, who had conducted deadly experiments on every Anbu like Kabuto to shape them into their current selves. "Reporting for duty, Admiral," he said. Orochimaru grinned expectantly and said, "Just in time, Kabuto. I hope you have read the update I sent you about your most recent mission." "I am capable of kidnapping, Admiral," Kabuto declared with assurance. As she showed the Anbu officer the subject's profile, Captain Nono sternly warned, "You'll need to be extra careful on this one, Lieutenant Yakushi. In fact, you'll need to use a genetic clone replacement of the subject we have created and make its death look like an unfortunate accident. The boy is exceptional on every level: genetics, mental strength, and physique. He shall be the first candidate for the Spartan program." The Anbu officer didn't see any reaction on the boy's face, but he froze when he saw the name and biography. 8-year-old Naruto Namikaze is the son of Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze and Captain Kushina Uzumaki, who were awarded the Terran Federation's highest honor. Humanity's hero. He was the son of the greatest heroes in human history who had enabled their first triumph over the Otsutsuki. For that accomplishment, they had given up everything, including the chance to spend more time with their only son. At a scale that would have appalled his parents if they were still living, that orphaned child would now be expected to perform the same task. Orochimaru sarcastically warned, "He's the nephew of Mito Uzumaki, Lord Hashirama's wife. You do understand the implications for the office if your mission fails or worse." Kabuto clenched his fist as he realized the consequences of such a failure. The least amount of mercy he would get would be death. "He's too high profile, Admiral Orochimaru. I'm sure there are other suitable candidates who are less noticeable if they disappear," Kabuto hesitated to say. "There are, and other Anbu operatives will be sent to capture them soon, but you will go first. I have looked at everything in the boy's life. He has everything I require in my first subject. Most importantly, through his mother he has the Uzumaki clan's genetics in his blood. Something which I need for the most crucial part of the Spartan program. He has to be acquired no matter the risk or consequences. There can be no replacement for this candidate, for the Uzumaki clan has nearly gone extinct in this war and the handful survivors are not having the characteristics we need in a candidate," elaborated Orochimaru. "Apart from the genetic and physical traits we need desperately, he has a high IQ like his father even at his young age. Given the right training and augmentations, he could help us achieve the pinnacle of success," confidently stated Captain Nono. Kabuto almost felt sorry for the boy's future because he had never seen the Admiral or his best scientist so focused on a single topic. Observing the brightness in his blue eyes, he pondered what transgressions the child had committed to deserve such a bleak future in spite of all the sacrifices his parents had made to ensure his safety alongside all people. He questioned whether, knowing what humanity would do to their only child, Minato or Kushina would have given their lives for the sake of their race's future. "Our civilization is staring at extinction, Kabuto. Every day the Otsutsuki drive us closer to the end. The Spartans will save us from that dark future. This boy will be the embodiment of our desire to survive," Nono sincerely stated. For once, a part of Kabuto's heart that still remembered what had been done to him cried out, "Are we worthy of that future if we need to do what we are about to once again to young children?" Admiral Orochimaru must have sensed his emotions because he only responded with a straightforward but insightful statement. "It is acceptable to spend lives, Lieutenant Yakushi. Not waste them to dreams of innocence or morality in the face of extinction. Oni will have its Spartans and you have your orders." The Kabuto operative was trained to respond to all orders from the office's leadership, particularly its leader, who put aside all of his reservations and fears to simply give a firm salute of acceptance. No matter how much it cost, the office always got what it wanted. Earth. A few days later, Naruto sat close to Fuji Lake's edge, taking in the serene water's surface before him. He was clearly staring at his own reflection with his vivid blue eyes. His life had been irrevocably altered by the events of the previous 2 weeks. Both of his parents had passed away. They were praised as heroes by everyone he met, and while a part of him wanted to accept the recognition for their sacrifice, another part of him was hurt by the harsh truth that they were really gone and would never return. Growing up, he didn't spend much time with his parents because they were both in the military and constantly away fighting in the never-ending conflict with the Otsutsuki. However, once a year, one by one, they would come see him whenever they were able to get a miraculous leave of absence from the front line following a particularly grueling campaign. The best time of his life had been the few times they had been able to visit him together. Even though he was raised for the majority of his life by his Aunt Mito, his mother's cousin and the wife of Lord Hashirama Senju himself, he knew they loved him because they had expressed and demonstrated their love for him during the little time they had together. His heart had shattered during the funeral service, and he had sobbed as much as his body would permit. The anguish and sorrow had come the fastest after the truth had reached him. The most difficult thing to accept, however, was the loneliness and sense of purposelessness that followed. His teachers expressed their concerns to Aunt Mito, who asked them to give him more time, because he was unable to concentrate in class, which resulted in his declining grades. Even though Aunt Mito and Uncle Hashirama had kindly taken him into their home as their ward, he didn't enjoy playing with the kids he used to know in order to avoid their conversations about their homes and families, which reminded him that he had recently lost his own. Above all, he was furious. He was furious with his parents for abandoning him, with the enemy for taking them away from him forever, and most of all with himself for failing to save them. The nightmares that tormented him in that fantasy world caused him to wake up in fear most nights after dreaming of ways he could have prevented their destruction. Even ramen, which he used to eat every day before, lost its appeal to him, even after Aunt Mito reprimanded him for his infatuation with it. When he saw the lake's calm water, he clenched his fist, but his heart was anything but furious. He stood up and threw a rock into the lake, which only briefly disturbed it. The faint face of an Otsutsuki, which many news outlets love to play on television, was staring back at him as the water rippled beneath him. As he leapt into the water to seize the enemy who had taken everything from him, he felt more rage than ever before. Naruto was grateful that his father had taught him how to swim during his last leave of absence, as he dove deeper into the lake in pursuit of the enemy he had spotted. A few meters in, the darkness began to deepen along with the burning feeling in his lungs as they fought for valuable oxygen. He frantically attempted to swim upward, but was startled when a sharp object encircled his feet and prevented him from moving. As a shadowy figure began to emerge from the darkness of the lake directly towards him, he looked down to see that a rope had been wound around his feet. He tried desperately to break free from his binds, but the hold was too tight. He swam back towards the surface as hard as he could, but he was powerless. His fingers hardly touched the source of the pain before something prickled at his neck, causing him to feel lightheaded for a brief moment. His eyes were frozen in horror at the shadow that was approaching him. He detested his choice to skip school in order to come here and be by himself, and he was terrified. His vision darkened, and he lost all further knowledge. In order to prevent the unconscious child from dying from the shock he must have received, Kabuto had pulled him outside the lake. For the last 2 days, he had been pursuing the boy, waiting for the ideal opportunity to carry out his crime. Fortunately, the subject had given him that opportunity by skipping class and traveling alone to the lake. An error that would permanently alter his life. He could clearly see the boy's anguish, anger, and bitterness. These feelings were typical of young children grieving the loss of their parents too soon. He only needed a little genjutsu effect to see the face of the Otsutsuki, the object of his grief and rage, in order to carry out his plan and jump into the lake. He wasted no time in disposing of the subject's clone's body in the lake, erasing any evidence of his presence. In an attempt to make this encounter appear to be a regrettable mishap, he had kindly put the clone to sleep and silently drowned him in the lake. After completing his order, he snatched up the real Naruto Namikaze, disguised himself in the subject, and quickly fled by leaping up onto the trees. It seemed to Lieutenant Kabuto that he was reliving history as he ran for his escape craft. He and hundreds of other Anbus throughout the remaining human space were now robbing the next generation of unfortunate children of a future they had chosen for themselves. Although it didn't stop him from completing his mission, he felt as though he was a part of an endless cycle with no end in sight. All he could do was silently hope as he looked at the little boy in his arms. Naruto, perhaps you'll succeed where my class and I failed. Perhaps humanity will finally be saved thanks to the sacrifice made by your generation, and no more kids will have to go through what you all did. Colony of Kolo, Orion System, a few days later. Captain Nono Yakushi has been with Oni for over 30 years. She started out in the Naval Intelligence Research Division. She had contributed to a number of banned projects in the fields of biological enhancement, augmentations, and weapons development, but the one she was about to start would alter human history forever. By entrusting her with the Spartan program, Admiral Orochimaru had placed great expectations on her. The faces of the roughly 300 young children she could see on her holoscreen, who were now drawn from all over the human colonies, came into focus. The majority were Otsutsuki war orphans who eagerly seized the chance offered by Oni to exact revenge on their deceased loved ones. Some didn't give a damn because they had been homeless and anything was preferable to starvation and a slow death. A few had to be secretly kidnapped against their will, but only one had to be abducted and replaced by a dead clone to hide his disappearance because he had been so well known. Nono had to erase the memories of the boy who was formerly known as Naruto Namikaze for the project's safety as well as the safety of the people involved, including herself. His first name, Naruto, which would soon be changed to his new call sign, was the only thing from his previous life that Oni and Nono had permitted him to keep. Ruto. 141. He would never be able to recall his parents, his history, or the life he might have led. He would be left with only one task: to save humanity from extinction, and those who would fight with him as fellow Spartans to achieve that admirable objective. She inhaled deeply and braced herself as her legs confidently strode to the closest door, leading her into a spacious auditorium crowded with 300 young children, all of whom were almost the same age. Even as Sergeant Danzo Shimura, the program's training officer, gazed at her with grudging respect, young boys and girls gazed up at her entrance with great curiosity. Upon arriving at the center stage, Captain Nono paused and gazed directly into the eyes of the children. Her eyes fell on Naruto's inquisitive face, which was fixed intently on her. "Welcome, all of you. Per Naval Code 1482, you are hereby conscripted into Terran Federation Naval Special Warfare Command. Your project from this point on shall be known as the Spartan Program." The previously quiet kids began to whisper with increased interest as many of them turned to watch her for more details. Humanity is facing extinction at the hands of the Otsutsuki clan. Your past lives are gone. Kolo shall be your new home. Your fellow trainees shall be your only family from this point on. Each of you has been handpicked to be humanity's hope and called to serve. You are truly exceptional among most children your age, which is why you have been chosen for this noble mission. A small part of Captain Nano's heart wondered how many would actually survive what she would put them through after witnessing the excitement and cockiness that filled many eyes upon hearing that praise. No matter what, she would be dealing with their blood and their lives. Because it would be an insult to the sacrifice they were asking of these young people, she was determined to make sure they were spent prudently and not wasted. Oni and humanity have been promised its greatest shinobi, ones who would help us win this war at all costs. I intend to deliver on that promise, and for that we shall train you, make you stronger and faster than anyone else, strip away everything that runs counter to that goal. You will be the vengeance of humanity, its greatest protectors and weapons of mass destruction against all its enemies. You will be our last hope, Spartans, Orion System, Kolo Colony, 3 years later. Standing on a raised platform with Sergeant Danzo Shimura, Captain Nono watched the outcomes of the 3 years of advanced training their young Spartan program cadets had undergone. From young children who were unable to defend themselves, Danzo had cruelly traumatized them with day-long exercises and physical training runs to build their physical strength, a strict and healthy diet, training in swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat, team exercises that taught them how to operate in squads, platoons, or as a company, survival exercises across the perilous territory of the colony of Kolo, weapons training, infiltration and sabotage, medical training, and most importantly the use of chakra in combat. The other teachers had been assigned to upskill their minds through classes on history, war strategy, in-depth briefings about the Otsutsuki and its slave species of their advantages and disadvantages, among other things, while Danzo trained their bodies. The 20 unmarked graves outside their base were evidence of the harsh reality that not all of the children had been able to keep up. 10 more had attempted to desert out of fear or self-preservation, but were ultimately killed by their own teachers. Since she was in charge of this program, some of the instructors came to her, and there were 270 cadets left out of the 300 they had started with. Given that the kids were still in training, they wanted to be a little lenient with them. They only recommended heightening the actual horror that awaited them once they were a little older and more seasoned. Nono had categorically refused to allow the enemy to spare humanity the luxury of time or give these children any quarter. In the last 3 years, the Otsutsuki Empire has once again invaded more than 24 human colonies, including the valiantly defended world of freedom. In order to turn the tide, humanity needed its Spartans as soon as possible, and they could not afford to be given fighters who lacked the strength to take on the Otsutsuki directly. Some of the other instructions had been annoyed by her harsh choices, but none could dispute the outcomes that were currently displayed on the screens. To conduct the most recent exercise, they split the cadets into 3 companies of 90 each: Alpha, Bravo, and Delta. A straightforward, orderly withdrawal from a hot zone that was overrun by enemy forces 10 times their own size was their mission. They had 30 minutes to travel through hills and forests to their evacuation site, which was almost 20 kilometers away. Alpha Company had less than 10% casualties in their ranks and finished the exercise by the deadline. Bravo Company had only marginally improved, arriving at the evacuation site ahead of schedule with 5% casualties. Many would find the results acceptable given the sheer number of enemies they faced, but Nono knew this wouldn't be sufficient and was eagerly awaiting the final company to carry out the exercise. The strongest members of Delta Company gathered in the school circle to form Naruto, or Ruto 141 as his teachers called him. Their goal was to devise a plan to complete their mission with the fewest possible casualties, which was a difficult task given the number of adversaries they faced and the short time frame until extraction. "I say we leave 5% of our forces as rearguard to buy time for the rest of us to escape and fulfill the mission," said Neji Hyuga. With a disdainful glare, Sasuke Uchiha said, "That won't be acceptable to me, Neji. And do you want to volunteer yourself for such sacrificial action?" Which caused the Hyuga warrior to clench his teeth. Sabuko no Gara calmly proposed, "We could all stick together. Strength in numbers is much more tactical than fighting alone or scattered." Samui asked gravely, "What do you think, 141? What's your opinion?" as the cold blonde's calculating eyes gazed expectantly at the other Spartan next to her. A number of eyes turned expectantly towards Ruto 141, causing him to roll his eyes at Samui, who remained silent. Naruto honestly stated, "I agree with Gara. Delta should stick together, but not in mere retreat." "Not in mere retreat? What other option there is apart from that? You lost your marbles, shithead," harshly reproved Tayuya. Naruto ignored Tayuya's outburst and stepped forward, smiling, to the size of 2 of their group's elder members. With encouragement, Pakura said, "What do you have in mind, Naruto? Let's hear it." Darui asked earnestly, "Just tell me one thing, will we fail our mission completely with your plan?" The dark-skinned boy was hoping for an honest response and was not let down when he received it. "Hopefully not," Naruto said confidently, gesturing for everyone to approach. "Most of us are focused on the mission's success, which is of supreme importance, I agree. But it would be a failure if we lose too many of our numbers in retreat. The enemy expects us to flee. I have a different idea." As Sergeant Danzo Shimura watched Ruto 141 tell his fellows about his plan, he couldn't help but raise an inquisitive eyebrow. Undoubtedly, it differed from the strategies used by the other 2 businesses. "He's a cheeky one, okay," Danzo remarked with a laugh. Nono said inquisitively, "He's going all in. It could work or backfire spectacularly." The faces of comrades had a wide range of expressions by the time Naruto explained his plan. While some stared at him as though he were crazy, the majority were fascinated. Pakura looked as interested as Darui, who nodded and said, "If we are fast enough, it might work." "It certainly beats running with our pants on fire. Retreat without putting up a good fight does not sit well with me," sighed Sasuke. Neji nodded when Tayuya adamantly stated, "I still say it's a bad plan." The heartless Hyuga said, "I agree. If the enemy realizes our strategy, few or none of us at all would make it." He was taken aback when Naruto clenched his fist and gave him an equally challenging glare. "No one gets left behind irrespective of their condition. Either all of us make it or none. We are Delta Company and we don't leave our men behind as sacrificial pawns." "Not even you," said Naruto fervently. At the open challenge, Neji gave him a sour look and stepped forward, but those unblinking blue eyes never flinched or averted their gaze. Neji smirked knowingly and said, "The decoy team of your plan has a high chance of getting slaughtered. Would you be willing to take up that job?" Naruto said, "I will. Will you help me?" without hesitation. Nearly everyone was overcome with shock, but Neji was the most affected as he gaped at the young blonde in front of him. To everyone's surprise, Samui calmly agreed, I shall support Ruto 141's plan. If this succeeds we can exfiltrate with minimum casualties. Sasuke grinned and said, as will I, to which his unorthodox blonde friend nodded gratefully. I agree, Spartans stick together, smiled Gaara. With a sigh, Tayuya said, you shitheads can't fool the enemy without me. If I die, I'll haunt your scrawny ass Ruto. Naruto nodded appreciatively. We are the strongest among the company. We can do this, it will give the others a chance to do their part and hopefully survive, said Bakura. Everybody turned to Neji, who had observed the solidarity emerging among his allies over their strategy. He glanced back at Naruto and saw that he was still extending his hand and requesting assistance. His conviction was strong, and he was also sincerely respected as a fellow employee. Many of the others smiled as Neji shook Naruto's hand and said, I suppose you have a name for our suicide squad? With a resigned sigh. Naruto shook Neji's hand appreciatively and with pleasure. Curiously, Gaara proposed, since we are taking on the greatest risk for the sake of our mission and comrades, how about noble? I like it. Bakura nodded firmly. Gaara frowned as Tayuya smirked and teased. You always wanted to be a knight in shining armor, Boy Scout. But the fiery redhead nodded her agreement anyhow. The decision was sealed by the others' agreement or simple shrug. Nono smiled and asked aloud, noble team, huh, children always surprise us. Danzo frowned and said, 141's plan is unconventional to say the least. He is ignoring the stated missing objective. The instructor scowled as Nono said gravely, he wants to bring them all home. If he succeeds, he might just do the impossible. That won't be possible every time, Captain Nono. If they truly become Spartans, they shall go into hell and some if not all will never come back in many missions. Do you truly think Ruto 141 can make them all survive? Danzo responded with disbelief. On her screen, Nono observed the young cadet and how he skillfully persuaded the others to persevere in the face of adversity. She could now see why Admiral Orochimaru wanted him to be the first Spartan. There was something special about him. He will try regardless, Sergeant Danzo. With the entire Delta Company operating at maximum speed in 3 distinct sections, the mission got underway in earnest. However, they were moving directly toward the enemy rather than fleeing from them. The remainder of Delta Company was split up into flanking manivores on the eastern and western fronts, while the majority had been positioned in the central formation that would encounter the main enemy force. 8 of the strongest and real Spartans of Delta Company alone made up the western Spartan flank, while the other flank on the eastern front was composed entirely of shadow clones platoons sent by the Spartans in the center as decoys. Members of the recently renamed Noble Team followed Naruto as he spearheaded the attack on the western front. Along with a variety of smaller weapons, they were equipped with TTR rifles and chakra swords, and the standard chakra armor provided some protection. His heart was pounding loudly, and he questioned whether the plan would actually work out as he had hoped. The shadow clones on the eastern front informed the communications that they had engaged the enemy forces coming from the east, so he didn't have any more time to think about that. Samui, Overwatch, he commanded quickly, and their team's sniper nodded as she leapt atop the tallest trees with a grace he could never match. Darui lead one of the fire teams. Bakura, Neji, Tayuya go with him and hammer the enemies from the left flank. Naruto concluded resolutely, I'll lead the second fire team. Sasuke and Gaara with me. As his fellow trainees divided into their respective teams, he was given a lot of recognition. He received a timely update from Samui by the time they arrived at their destination. I'm seeing 200+ forces on foot in this sector. No enemy air support in vicinity, mostly arachnids, grunts and wait I'm seeing a few newer on ground and ghosts in their ranks, said Samui with seriousness. Naruto scowled. The majority of their forces were composed of arachnids and grunts, who had already received extensive training on the slave species used by the Otsutsuki. Arachnids were destructive insects that scuttled around on 4 spindly legs and were roughly the size of large horses. They used 2 spiked razor limbs to attack, and if they got close enough, their razor-edged mandibles could split a human in 2. Their ridiculously large numbers compensated for their relative weakness against standard-issue weapons. These bugs also demonstrated the ability to burrow underground and scale walls. Grunts were bipedal animals with flat, 3-toed feet and a rear toe. They were typically no taller than 5 feet. Despite having poor vision and hearing, they had an excellent sense of smell. The fact that they used methane as their breathing gas and always carried gas masks and containers with them distinguished them from other slaves. They were known to have dangerous zeal and frequently suicidal tendencies to kill their enemies alongside themselves, but they were also not very intelligent and occasionally behaved cowardly if their leaders were removed. To make up for their disgusting losses, they were numerous and had a risky rate of reproduction. These two species' unending waves of suicidal attacks were the foundation of the Otsutsuki planetary invasions, which pounded human defenses. In contrast, the Newer were a distinct threat class. When they first appeared on the battlefield, many human soldiers were terrified of these bipedal creatures, which stood at least 8 feet tall. They were capable of crushing even the most formidable warriors on Earth because their arms and legs were twice as large as those of a typical human. In addition to being skilled marksmen and lethal in close quarters, the Newer were the officers and planners whose keen vision enabled them to grasp the smallest details of the battlefield. Additionally, they had a strong devotion to their Otsutsuki masters and were willing to sacrifice themselves for them. Ghosts, on the other hand, were walking tanks of the Otsutsuki. They resembled large hairy monkeys and carried themselves on 4 large legs. They could withstand fire from a platoon at a time due to the sheer number of heavy weapons, shields, and thick armor. Their energy weapons could devastatingly tear through armor, ground vehicles, and human bodies. As Gaara and Naruto positioned themselves behind trees like him, Sasuke smirked and whistled. Looks like we've almost got a full house of crazies in there, except the Otsutsuki. Gaara asked gravely, "What's the play, Ruto?" and observed as Naruto swiftly established a connection over their squad channel. "Darui, hit them with your team from the left first. Once you engage and draw their attention, we will open the other flank," told Naruto. Darui was acknowledged by "copy" on the squad communications. 2 of Naruto's closest friends grinned eagerly as he said, "As soon as their focus shifts to the other flank, Gaara will immobilize the Newer for Samui to dispose of with prejudice, followed by an artillery barrage. Sasuke and I will charge towards the ghosts to neutralize them." As they took control of the large, open field in front of them for the final time, Noble Team awaited their moment of attack. Along with their bodies, Captain Nono had begun injecting them with a variety of drugs over the years that greatly improved their senses and abilities. This was the reason why, at a time when most of them were only 12 years old, the Spartan cadets had the physique of someone in their late teens. Naruto witnessed the moment Darui's team launched the attack with ease, even from a great distance, demonstrating the value of those improvements. As he watched in slow motion as Darui and his team detonated a series of chakra grenades that instantly destroyed scores of arachnids and grunts' holoforms, a sensation Nono had once referred to as Spartan time began to set in. A devastating barrage of gunfire followed, eliminating even more of the enemy's disposable soldiers before they could recover from the shock. Even as the angry arachnids and grunt platoons charged in the direction of Team Darui, the Newer and Ghost's infantry turned to engage the new threat. Gaara wasted no time in trapping the Newer completely, causing strong hands of reinforced sand to rise from the ground beneath the majority of their feet. Samui's holoforms vanished as the Otsutsuki's officers were startled and immediately struck by lethal sniper fire that went straight through their heads and necks. Sasuke mockingly remarked, "Spartan time, Noble One," which caused Naruto to grin slightly. Both of them charged into combat at full speed, aiming for their most important targets. Every cadet in the Spartan program possessed at least one special set of abilities, as demonstrated by Tayuya's use of her lethal genjutsu to confuse the enemy's perception of her squad's location or cause them to collide. Such trapped or confused forces were mercilessly destroyed by Darui and Pakura using lightning-style and fire-style ninjutsu attacks, respectively. One of the top close-quarters fighters in the Spartan program delivered a personal smackdown to the few fortunate individuals who were still able to make it through. In order to protect his team, Neji used his Kekai Genkai to unleash a hurricane of chakra devastation all around them, tearing scores of arachnids and grunts to pieces or just throwing them away like rag dolls. On the other hand, no one in the entire program could match Naruto's proficiency with the body flicker technique or the vast amounts of chakra stored in his body, which allowed him to outfight the majority of Spartans and their adversaries. Sasuke's deadly gunfire, which mowed down all the enemies in his squad leader's Patha, the renowned Sharingan of the Uchiha, provided him with an even better version of Spartan time than Naruto's, allowing him to cover the majority of a 2-kilometer run in less than 20 seconds. Gaara and Samui's tag team had already neutralized the majority of the Newer officers and were battling the remaining survivors, even as Sasuke covered him and chased after him quickly. Naruto had a direct and unobstructed route to the ghosts. As Neji fought to prevent the majority of the advancing arachnids and grunt forces from destroying them, the 4-legged walking tanks were now directing heavy, accurate fire on Darui's team, who had dispersed to make themselves as small a target as possible. Gaara launched a barrage of sand artillery at the ghosts, but it had little effect other than temporarily halting their fire on Darui's team. Naruto had only needed a window. He was already on the first ghost, effortlessly slicing off its head with his sword laced with wind chakra. He had already thrown his lethal sword to pierce the neck of another ghost before the beast could release its death scream and its holoform disappeared. He then transported himself to a projected point in the air, directly above his next target. He grabbed his sword in midair, cut the next ghost under him in half, and then kicked the closest one hard, sending it flying to the ground as a chakra sword pierced its eye. "Newers at year 6, Sasuke yelled frantically. As Sasuke's shadow sped past him to deal with the defeated threat, Naruto turned to see twin 8-foot giants charging directly at him. One of them was struck in the face by a searing fireball. The rest of Newers' anger was still directed directly at Naruto. Naruto swiftly cleaned the blood off his sword and leapt in the direction of his adversary with grim resolve. Naruto sidestepped a kick from the giant monster that would have broken most humans by delivering a solid roundhouse kick to its side, barely causing it to flinch, as his chakra sword viciously clashed with the newer officer's own energy sword, sending sparks of energy flying out. However, a second Naruto appeared from the ground beneath its feet to cut it in half from the bottom, revealing the distraction too late. "Reinforcements incoming from the enemy center's direction, brace yourselves," advised Samui. While the rest of his team was destroying the last of the enemy forces on the western flank, Naruto glanced at the dead form of his opponent, who had vanished. He checked with the Shadow Clone Platoon on the eastern front and discovered a similar situation occurring there as well. He also noted that almost as many new contacts were approaching as reinforcements. The enemy had attempted to encircle human forces using their numerical superiority. Now, as their flanks struggled to survive, they were confronted with the same threat and were attempting to thwart it by sending reinforcements from the center to its flanks. The time had come to deliver the final blow. He gave the fateful order in a voice as calm as ever. "Flanks, hold your ground. Delta Company, break through the enemy's center." As they watched the decisive order from Ruto 141 unfold on the video screens, Sergeant Danzo Shimura and Captain Nono were both unable to conceal their surprise. In order to prevent encirclement, the 82 Spartans of Delta in the center, who had been playing defense up until this point, launched a blitzkrieg attack on the enemy's weakened center, which had sent a significant portion of its force to hold its collapsing eastern and western flanks. The human fighters gave the attack their all because they knew it was now or never. The Otsutsuki forces were massacred, something that a veteran like Danzo had only witnessed a handful of times during his more than 20 years of service. Most of Delta Company fell upon them with a vengeance, and the grunts and arachnids fell in droves like a tidal wave. Heavy weapons or ninjutsu attacks, along with lethal sniper fire, targeted Newer and Ghosts. In hand-to-hand combat, some of the more courageous Spartans even ruthlessly killed the Otsutsuki elite officers. The enemy had not anticipated that their own plan would be thrown back in their face, and they ultimately paid the price when its center fell in less than 5 minutes with only minor, non-fatal Spartan casualties. The human flanks on the eastern and western directions fought desperately against the new reinforcements while the enemy center was ripped to pieces. The majority of the enemy's able forces were routed to the eastern flank, where their shadow clones were now taking casualties by the Spartan forces that had destroyed the enemy center. Danzo saw that the wave of human reinforcements that would soon arrive to support the Shadow Clone forces would pin the enemies on that front from all sides. A smaller relief force was then on its way to support Noble Team on the western flank. Nono said, "They have some resolve, Sergeant," with surprise. Danzo glanced at the western flank and saw that, despite being vastly outnumbered, Noble Team was not only holding their front but also making slow progress. Ruto 141 and Sasuke 297's tag team led the charge, showering any enemy who dared to stand in their way with death. Danzo was reminded of a fallen hero as he saw the mastermind behind this attack flash across the battlefield. Young Naruto fought bravely with the full support of Noble Team at every turn, displaying the same lightning-fast attacks, quick thinking on the battlefield, and most importantly, an unwavering resolve to win for his squad, his company, and humanity. "Your son is still carrying on your legacy, Lieutenant Colonel Minato." As he watched Naruto battle, Danzo thought of the young Lieutenant Call of the 7th Shock Troopers, who had shown similar courage and intelligence in achieving humanity's first and only triumph over the unbeatable Otsutsuki Empire. He noticed that even Captain Nono, who was always under control, was moved by how strikingly similar Naruto's fighting style was to that of his late father. Like his mother, whose sacrifice prevented Admiral Tobarama's Fifth Fleet from being destroyed in the Battle of Freedom, he was determined to save all of his fellow Delta Company members. When the final enemy forces were routed on the Western Front after Spartan reinforcements arrived from the center, the child of humanity's greatest heroes of this war accomplished the impossible against all odds, just like his parents. The final adversary on the Eastern Front was also slain a minute later. There was the same eerie silence on the battlefield as there was in the control room as the two Oni officers who were in shock observed the devastation and the outcome. Although Delta Company had been wounded, they had not been Kia themselves, and all enemy forces had been killed. The young Spartans experienced both shock and joy, but Naruto Namikaze's strict and regulated orders soon overtook them. Good work, Delta. Now let's race back to Exfil. We've got 15 minutes left to catch our ride back home. Nobody gets left behind. As Delta Company prepared for their next goal, which had been their initial mission, there was a sense of solidarity and camaraderie among them. The able-bodied assisted their injured comrades as they all rushed to the exfil point. When Naruto assisted Neji 199, who had been hurt in the battle, Nono witnessed him fulfill his own command. Despite the Hyuga's prior resistance to his plan and their mild animosity, Naruto didn't abandon him. Rather, he assisted him. The other boy was shocked and humbled by this act. With just 1 minute remaining in their extraction window, Delta Company arrived at the exfil point as a team. While the rest of the company boarded the shuttles, Naruto and the rest of Noble Team kept a safe distance, escorting the injured first. With only a few seconds remaining, Naruto was the last member of the Noble Team to enter the craft after his entire company had done so. Nono saw Naruto finally turn in his shuttle toward his comrades as the shuttles took off to transport them all back to base. Although there were no words spoken, Captain Nono witnessed the cadet, formerly known as Ruto 141, become Noble -1 for his squad as well as the entire Delta Company of Spartans through the silent but respectful stances. Their leader had given them the victory and, more significantly, ensured that they all returned home safely. It would only intensify the suffering Noble 1 and his Spartans would endure next. Danzo reaffirmed, "They are all ready for augmentations, Captain." Nono clenched her fist at his approval of their suitability for the most challenging and agonizing portion of the program. "I know," Nono sighed deeply and whispered. "It's a necessary sacrifice, Captain. They're good, but Supreme Commander Madara wants to see the Spartans in action for Operation Prometheus within a year at most. They won't survive that without the augmentations and extraordinary power we shall bestow upon few of them," Danzo said with a seriousness that made Nono clench. She angrily objected, saying, "He's wrong, it's a suicide mission and the children aren't ready for that scale yet. It's what they were bred for all these years." She was sufficiently reminded of the Spartan program's actual goal by the seasoned instructor's scathing and icy response. To sacrifice every child in the Spartan program in order to ensure humanity's survival against the Otsutsuki. Her worried and hopeful eyes fell on Naruto's figure standing in the shuttle with his allies. Nono fervently hoped that the boy would perform another miracle in this mission, just as he had done in this one. However, humanity was rapidly losing hope as each of their colonies was destroyed in a new conflict. The Spartans were their last hope, their last desperate risk to keep their kind from going extinct. Despite the fact that every Spartan child's life in front of her was the cost of that future. "We can only keep moving forward and bear our sins for history to judge, Sergeant Danzo. We will begin augmentations as ordered. Prepare the Biju." Colony of Kolo, Orion System, 2 weeks later. Along with the other members of the new Noble Team, Naruto sat quietly at his table in the mess hall. Everyone had gloomy looks on their faces because today was their day of reckoning, and the food in front of them was unaltered even though it might be their last meal on Earth. He glanced around the larger hall, where all 270 Spartans were gathered, all with identical faces and unfinished meals. Following their training exercise, Captain Nono and their instructors had spent the previous 2 weeks mentally and physically preparing each of them for what lay ahead. But the obvious question still stood. Would it be sufficient? "Ruto, you think some of us will make it?" When he asked the question, he noticed that his normally composed friend appeared unsure. The eyes of the entire Noble Team were fixed on him with a similar question. The members of Delta Company have been treating him as their leader ever since their most recent training mission, in which he successfully returned all of the members home alive. Even the Spartans from Alpha and Bravo Company looked up to him after being impressed by the feat he accomplished in spite of the odds. Thanks to their keen vision and razor-sharp hearing, almost every Spartan company in the hall had heard Gaara's question. Like Noble Team, Naruto could feel their eyes staring at him, which only made him tighten his fist. "We survived through 3 years of hell together. Some of us didn't make it or gave up, but we haven't forgotten any of our lost. Humanity is counting on all of us as its last hope against extinction," This final step will help us get strong enough to become just that, he thoughtfully responded. Rising from his chair, he surveyed the Spartan trainees surrounding him and memorized their names and faces, realizing that he would never again see many of them. Many of us may not make it from this final mission of survival. None of us can deny that hard fact. The only thing I personally can promise if I survive myself that we will make it count, sincerely stated Naruto. We will never forget. With grim determination and a solemn vow burning in their eyes, the 270 Spartans rose from their seats as one and gave a firm salute to each and every one of their fellow cadets, knowing that this was their last time together. In order to find the person he wanted to talk to prior to his operation, Sasuke wandered through the dull and gray hallways of their base. He rushed through the virtual training center until he found the person he was looking for because he couldn't afford to be late. Because of his curiosity and hacking skills, Bakura had recently discovered the difficult task that his best friend was about to undertake. And he was very concerned about it. When he discovered Ruto 141 seated in a corner, watching the Battle of Freedom on the holoscreen, he couldn't help but remind Sasuke that they would be doing something similar today after seeing the suicidal charge of the 7th Battalion of Shock Troopers under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze. Sasuke couldn't help but notice how much Ruto resembled Minato Namikaze in appearance as he approached his friend, who, like the majority of humanity, saw him as a hero. The eyes and hair color were identical, even down to the style, and Ruto's fighting style was eerily similar to that of humanity's greatest hero. However, Ruto informed them all that, like the majority of Spartans, he was an orphan who was rescued from the streets of Earth and recruited by Oni. For his own and everyone else's safety, Sasuke kept his mouth shut despite having a suspicious feeling that was untrue. He smiled a little when he remembered that day all those years ago when he first met the blonde. 3 years back, in an attempt to escape the sea of lava that was rapidly approaching him, Sasuke ran as fast as he could through the volcanic mountain region of Kolo. Dozens of other Spartans were following suit around him. He questioned whether they could survive the long walk back to base without food or water, with the threatening Kolo volcanoes spouting ash and lava all around them. They had to reach their finish line, which was at least 10 miles away, within the next hour or risk being abandoned. To exacerbate the situation, their cruel instructors had informed them that the last person to arrive would also be left behind and that there were only a few seats available on the planes that would transport them back to base. The Spartan cadets were all focused on their own survival and working independently because of this. When he saw that Ruto 141, another cadet, was at least half a kilometer ahead, he gritted his teeth in frustration. The blonde left them all in the dirt because he was faster and more resilient than the others. A loud explosion diverted Sasuke's attention, and when he turned to look to the far right, he saw that the closest volcano had erupted violently, showering the 2 poor Spartans closest to it with large rocks and specks of lava. He winced when he saw a young blonde girl scream in pain as one of the falling rocks struck her, causing her to fall gracefully, and a red-headed boy scream in pain as lava droplets struck parts of his body, burning his clothing. The alarming voice of Pakura 156 said, "Shit, Samui's down. Gaara's on fire." With a chilly response, Neji 199 said, "Leave them. This is a survival exercise, we'll be left behind otherwise." A puzzled Bakura and Sasuke were left behind as Darui 183, Tayuya 57, and a few others in the vicinity simply nodded bitterly as they continued on. In an attempt to make their own choice, they glanced at the erupting volcano and then at each other anxiously. But someone else completely made one for them. When a blonde blur sped past him, headed directly for the trapped Samui first, Sasuke's eyes widened in shock. Bakura firmly declared, "It's Ruto 141. Let's go help ourselves." Sasuke was astounded by his fellow Spartan's speed, but even more so by his choice to drop his command of the charge in order to rescue 2 stranded survivors. After witnessing Ruto's decision, he raced after Bakura anyhow, and he was even more shocked to learn that many others who had already rushed forward were motivated to turn around and aid their wounded by that one act. Meanwhile, Ruto was almost to Samui when a string of explosions sent a rain of rocks in the direction of the 2 Spartans. Wind style. Shockwave. As Ruto knelt down to remove the big boulder that was pinning Samui, he unleashed a deadly burst of ninjutsu that decapitated the rocks into tiny fragments that fell harmlessly around him. Gaara had already been reached by Bakura, who doused him with a minor water-style attack that extinguished the flames he had previously been engulfed in. Meanwhile, Sasuke had joined Ruto in their attempt to lift the heavy boulder, despite the fact that the hot rock was brutally scorching their exposed palms. He glanced down and saw that Samui was bleeding out and had fainted from the pain, which only caused him to glance quickly at Ruto. Sasuke flinched as he saw another explosion, wondering if this crazy act of rescue would be his demise. He warned, "We need to get out of here." 141. Ruto retorted, "Not without everyone else. I am not leaving them behind," while exerting additional effort to free Samui from the trap. Reluctantly, Sasuke said, "Shit, then let's hurry." Both of them were taken aback when Bakura, Gaara, and a few other people joined them. With their combined assistance, they were able to roll off the boulder and free Samui. While another Spartan examined Gaara's burns, Bakura immediately began using the small medical ninjutsu she had learned to stop the bleeding in the injured girl. With a pained smile, Gaara said, "Thanks for coming back for us." Bakura gave a small smile, and Ruto and Sasuke nodded grimly. Ruto confidently replied, "Let's move, we'll all make it together." In a few tense moments, Bakura had stopped Samui's bleeding, and Sasuke assisted her in carrying the unconscious girl while two others assisted Gaara. Ruto led the charge and gave the final nod when he saw that everyone was prepared. Figured he'd be here. When Sasuke noticed that Samui had arrived and was standing casually next to him, he was interrupted from his memories of the past. Despite her tendency to speak sparsely, the icy blonde had remembered what Ruto and the others had done for her that day. Although she would never publicly acknowledge it, Sasuke was aware that, like the other members of the noble team, she thought of Ruto as a friend. He asked knowingly, "Bakura told you?" And she slowly nodded. "They say the Nine Tails is the strongest and most violent among all the tailed beasts. I wanted to check if Ruto was mentally prepared enough to face the sealing process," said Samui with seriousness. Reminded of that alarming realization, Sasuke sighed and turned to face his friend. He was concerned for the life of his best friend, whom he had watched over for years. He had played a significant role in Sasuke's survival of their demanding training. Like many others, Ruto had given him hope, and the Spartan program's lone Uchiha clenched his fist at the thought of embarking on a suicide mission. "Why him?" he inquired sourly. "Something to do with Ruto's blood and genetics strong enough to hold the Nine Tails. I'm worried for Gaara as well. The one tail they plan to seal in him is said to be the craziest of all the beasts," said Samui with hesitation. The news that two noble team members had been selected as the Jinchuriki for the most dangerous tailed beasts made Sasuke clench his fists even harder and suppress a frustrated sigh. The remaining 7 Biju were also being divided among other qualified candidates from the Spartan companies Alpha and Bravo. Sasuke and Samui, 2 Spartan candidates who lacked the strength to contain the Bijus themselves, would also be in danger because Captain Nono intended to give them the chakra of the tailed beast in order to increase their strength. He resolutely responded, "On the battlefield in a sea of Otsutsuki blood, none of us are dying anywhere else." The images of his dead parents and older brother made him long for the vengeance that was burning deep inside of him. While Sasuke's parents had been killed in action and his older brother had gone missing, Samui, of all people, understood his sentiments and nodded resolutely. In contrast, Samui had lost her entire family. Even after everything, she had lost at first when her colony world of Dune fell to the Otsutsuki, killing her father in the process, and forcing Samui and her younger brother to flee with their widowed Mothera. Sasuke came to admire her unwavering resolve. Along with the Terran Federation's forces, the family had escaped to another colony world, only to have it attacked as well. The most devastating blow was when Atsui also died when the colony they had been evacuated to by the Terran Federation was attacked and destroyed. Samui's mother had died on the world, leaving her and Atsui orphans. His mother, Staff Sergeant Makoto Uchiha of the 23rd Marine Division, was killed in another battle while attempting to save humanity's dying colonies, and his father, Fugaku Uchiha, a captain of the 10th Shock Troopers Battalion, was also killed in action. His own story had not been without tragedy. The loss of his progenial older brother, Lieutenant Itachi Uchiha, who served with the 2nd Shock Troopers Battalion and went out to rescue another colony under attack, was the most devastating blow. His squad vanished in the battle and was never heard from again. Though the shinobi in him was taught to reject such irrational hopes, a part of Sasuke wished his brother was still alive in contrast to Samui's killed family. Because of this, he and Samui were both committed to defending their new family among the Spartans, of which Ruto was a crucial part. As they approached Ruto together, they noticed that the boy's gaze was focused on the last video of Minato Namikaze engaging in single combat with dozens of Otsutsuki in a hopeless battle. The feed ended when the severely injured hero defeated his adversaries and, with a few of his remaining 7th Shock Troops Battalion men by his side, detonated the nuclear warheads. Sasuke calmly asked, "You okay, Ruto?" And his blonde friend nodded. You'll need to be at your best to survive the sealing process. Is that why you were watching the Battle of Freedom? Samui inquired with interest. A little. They did what had to be done against all odds. I wanted some of that determination and hoped myself to do what I volunteered for, replied Naruto frankly. Ruto laughed and Samui gave a small smile of her own when he teased Sasuke, saying, "Good. Because I'll piss over your grave if you get killed by a stupid fox of all people." She went on, "That would be a shitty way to go." Sasuke was ecstatic when Naruto returned the smile, letting go of some of the tension that had been in his eyes. There was a renewed will to succeed in his eyes after the blonde stood up again. He muttered appreciatively, "Thank you, Sasuke and Samui. I needed that." The Omni tool on Ruto's wrist beeped a notification, and the three of them glanced at it. As the three of them read the message on it, realization struck. Ruto said gravely, "I guess I'll see you on the other side. Survive, that's an order." Sasuke confidently responded, "Roger that, noble one," which caused Samui to nod as well. Somberly, Naruto made his way down the gray-tinted hallway that led to the operating room. He always wore armor or BDUs, so being in nothing but a white hospital gown made him feel very exposed. His mind drifted to the fateful day when their superiors informed them of the sealing procedure and augmentations that all Spartans would be going through. 2 weeks prior, along with 270 other Spartans, Naruto sat in the training command center in complete silence while they awaited Captain Nono to start her briefing. She had praised him earlier in the day for his unorthodox strategy, which had earned him the title of company commander, and allowed all of the Spartans from Delta Company to survive the exercise. Naruto was given the call sign Noble One, signifying his ascent to leadership among his peers, and Noble Team was formally transformed into a squad of its own. He was worried when she merely wished him luck for the upcoming exercises, as he had anticipated that she would support him to maintain the excellent performance. He wondered whether he would ever find out why Captain Nono had appeared so distressed earlier as he sat in this enormous room. Spartans, all of you have done extremely well these past 3 years. Each of you has survived whatever we have thrown at you and have proved your mettle. Today, in comparison to most Terran forces, you are already superior shinobi and can do more than all of them on the battlefield. But against the Otsutsuki themselves and few of their special slave species, you will need to be more powerful, which is why High Command has decided to bestow upon you unique powers. Captain Nono began with a seriousness. When multiple images appeared on the holoscreen, they were all fascinated. However, when they saw the shapes of the hideous creatures, their curiosity quickly gave way to fear. The original 10 tails, a chakra tree planted by one of the Otsutsuki who came to our planet to prepare it for later harvesting by its clan, is represented by these tailed beasts, which once plagued ancient Earth. They are massive forms of chakra that were given sentience by the Sage of Six Paths himself, the man who gave humanity the gift of chakra. For reasons that are lost to history, the Otsutsuki was Kagaya, the mother of the Sage Six Paths himself, and she ate the chakra fruit produced by the tree rather than saving it for her clan. The god tree in the form of 10 tails also fought to regain its stolen power, but was defeated by the sage and his brother. They divided its power into 9-tailed beasts because the 10 tails was a force of nature that was impossible to control forever. The godly power she gained destroyed her sanity, and she had to be destroyed by her own sons, the sage being one of them. The tailed beasts were used against their will in a number of wars until our ancestors made a deal with them to prevent more bloodshed, according to Captain Nono, who went into great detail. The tailed beasts would remain isolated and not be used or participate in humanity's affairs, and would only be called to fight alongside us if the Otsutsuki clan arrived to destroy us all, he explained. Naruto looked at Sasuke and Gaara and saw that both of his friends were as shocked as he was when he first learned about ancient history. Now that the enemy has arrived, neither humanity or the tailed beasts will be spared by them. It is why they have agreed to join us in this war. Alone, these beasts are tremendous forces of destruction on the battlefield. But they also are wild creatures who often run amok in battle and are easier prey for an experienced enemy like the Otsutsuki to capture or kill. This is why High Command has decided to get them sealed into our finest and most refined warriors. Every Spartan was struck with a deathly silence as the situation's reality set in. Many people looked anxiously at the terrifying creatures with many tails and pictured having one of these creatures imprisoned inside of them. Neji asked earnestly, "Why us?" and the captain nodded. "We have the sealing technology to host the Bijus among select Spartans. With the right training and guidance, both human and beast's power can be combined to create a super soldier that alone can win on any battlefield. 9 Spartans will be selected based on their suitability to survive the sealing process as the host of these beasts, with the rest also receiving fragments of the tailed beast chakra to enhance their powers. With such powers, each of you will be able to single-handedly take on the Otsutsuki themselves, which most of our armed forces can't today, replied Nono with integrity. The next set of pictures she showed them featured a special set of armor and weapons that none of them had ever seen before. This is the first of its kind, the Hachiman chakra-powered assault armor system, named after the god of war itself. It is made of the same titanium alloy that is reserved for our starships, and instead of being a typical suit of armor, it is a biomechanical system that gives its user complete control over how it functions. It can protect its owner from most ground weapons, including small ship armaments, and its chakra shielding will be powered by the energy of the Biju or the beast itself implanted into your body. A neural interlace will help you better synchronize your attacks with the tailed beast or its chakra fragments embedded in you. The cost of each armor system is almost the same as building 2 starships, and it also includes healing gel, a medical chakra reserve that is dispersed in case of injury, energy serum, and a variety of cocktails to enhance Spartan time when needed. In addition to the numerous chakra assault rifles, submachine guns, rocket launchers, and other weapons you see on the screen, the Biju chakra flowing through your veins, which most of these weapons will use, will make you a formidable opponent and a demon for our adversaries on the battlefield. The armor weighs almost 1,000 pounds and would kill any normal human being if they attempted to use it, so you will need the tailed beast's power to use it to its fullest. The Hyuga sat up straighter when Sergeant Danzo moved forward and gave Neji a direct look. We have trained and enhanced your minds and bodies all these years for this final enhancement. The augmentations you have received so far make you Spartans the only ones suitable enough for this task. The question is, are you brave enough to do everything in your power for mankind's survival? Danzo sternly responded. Tayuya asked directly, what are the chances of us surviving these sealing and augmentations, sir? Worst case scenario, we expect less than 60% of you will survive the operation. Like almost everyone else, Naruto was shocked to hear that and was unable to conceal it. He glanced at his allies, the kids he had spent the last few years with, and the closest thing he had to a family. He did not feel comfortable with the prospect of losing almost half of them in an instant, and not on a battlefield but in an operating room. Several other Spartans gave him hopeful glances as he asked earnestly, what's the best case scenario? Captain Nono gave him a grateful nod before providing the response that everyone was waiting for. We perform the augmentations and sealing of an actual tailed beast on a volunteer first. The learnings from that process will help us reduce the risk the other candidates shall face. It goes without saying, the chances of that volunteer surviving the process are extremely low, replied Nono with integrity. In other words, it's a suicide mission. Any of you brave enough to take it, cadets? Sternly replied Danzo. I'll do it. When Naruto confirmed it, the noble team and all the other Spartans in the training center were taken aback. They watched in disbelief as he got up from his seat, his eyes full of resolve. Sasuke was not entirely shocked by his friend's choice because Ruto had always been the one to venture into the unknown for the sake of the others. No matter how challenging the situation, he was a good soldier who was always there for his fellow soldiers. Sergeant Danzo asked bluntly, "You sure about this, Ruto 141? And the blonde gave him a firm nod. "I'll make it, sir. Count on it." Samui gazed at the boy, who had gained even more respect from the other Spartans for his unwavering determination. Many of them were relieved that Ruto was willing to carry out this suicide mission in order to increase their chances of surviving. She looked at Neji and noticed that the heartless Hyuga was even more appalled by their squad leader's behavior. "Very well, Noble -1. We hope your courage and sacrifice will help save as many lives as possible." As he approached the end of the corridor, Naruto found the strength he needed by recalling the faces of his comrades and the hopes they had placed on him. Before being taken up by Oni, he was raised as an orphan on the streets of Earth without any family. His Spartan comrades were the closest thing he had to a family. He needed to get as many of them out of this difficult process as possible while surviving whatever hell lay ahead. He entered a massive cavern as the last doors opened, and a sizable group of scientists and sealing specialists, led by Captain Nono herself, were waiting for him on the other side. "You ready for this, 141? Captain Nono inquired softly. "Yes, Captain," he dutifully answered. "Please take off your clothes then, we should get started." After undergoing similar experiments in the past, Naruto obeyed the order and immediately removed the gown that covered his modesty. Captain Nono put a comforting hand on his shoulder as he stepped forward and lay down on the operating table. "There will be a lot of pain, Ruto. You will not remain conscious through the procedure, but it is vital you fight to survive as hard as possible. Latch on to any memory that gives you strength and do not succumb to too much negative emotions that the tailed beast will bring upon being sealed inside of you. At all costs, you must use your mental strength to survive against the beast until we complete the procedure, warned Nono. He tried to ward off the uneasiness in his heart and nodded. Administer the sedative. As the first group of medical personnel moved forward and prepared their tools, Captain Nono watched as Naruto passed out after receiving the sedative. If the subject lived that long, the entire process would take at least 2 days, with several teams working under her direction all day and night. A group of neurosurgeons arrived at the subject's side, having already shaved his head clean for the first part of the procedure. The brain was made visible by the lead surgeon's tiny incision in the skull. In order to reorganize the capillaries in the occipital lobe of the left cerebral hemisphere of the brain, the elderly physician and his team then began a drawn-out and delicate procedure. The blood flow beneath the subject's retina's rods and cones was increased by this blood vessel redistribution. After almost 3 hours, the procedure was finished, the subject's head was bandaged, and the portion of the skull that had been removed to gain access to the occipital lobe was fixed. While Nono was relieved that the simpler portion of the operation was over, he also knew that the true test of Ruto's survival instincts was just getting started. Following a 30-minute rest, she personally oversaw a group of surgeons who worked on the patient's thyroid gland. In order to allow the other surgeons to implant a platinum pellet after she made a large enough incision in the left thyroid gland, her team closed the incision after the procedure was completed. As the growth hormones were released and gradually began to move through the subject's body, promoting the further growth of skeletal and muscular tissue, she held her breath in fear. In order to support the prior procedure, injections of muscle enhancement were given throughout the subject's body at the same time. Nono watched as the procedures caused the subject's body to change and for his soul-crushing screams to start. The veins in Naruto's body were being burned alive by the flames of Amaterasu itself, and he began screaming hysterically in agonizing pain as his heartbeat accelerated to dangerous levels. When a vein ripped out of his body, Nono had to intervene fast, and her team hurried to lessen the harm. Hang on, 141 inches pain. Naruto's world was turned into a raging inferno that refused to go out and was determined to turn him into ashes, and he felt it in every fiber of his being. He cried out in pain as his bones crushed and expanded simultaneously, his veins felt like they were on fire, and his blood was boiling. The sheer pressure he was under was threatening to shatter his heart into millions of fragments. He thrashed due to desperation and excruciating pain, and multiple hands held him in a steely grip, making his screams even more agonizing. He caught glimpses of a redhead woman and a young, blonde man in military uniforms for a few brief seconds. For the first time in years, he started crying as they looked at him with horror and sorrow. In that training center, he caught glimpses of his fellow Spartans and his friends from Noble Team, looking at him with concern and hope. Their apprehensive expressions reminded him of the 3 years of hell they had endured together and the fact that they would all be experiencing the same suffering as he was. After 40 hours, as an assistant used a surgical cloth to wipe the perspiration from her forehead, Captain Nono let out a tired sigh. She looked at the boy who had spent almost 2 days in agony she wouldn't want to inflict on her worst enemy. He had flatlined and almost died on the operating table multiple times, but he would always fight back just as the medical staff was about to give up. She pondered the determination this child must possess to endure what most people cannot. Given the difficulties, Nono had hardly witnessed a miracle in her extensive career, but Ruto 141 was the first candidate to not only undergo but also survive the augmentation procedure. She hoped that he would now be able to withstand the sealing of the most dangerous tailed beast within him. A never-ending darkness encircled Naruto from all sides, trapping him. Death would have been merciful at this point, but for some reason he was still hanging around in this weird place, even though his world was filled with pain and his body was screaming from the many wounds it had sustained. Until the first stream of light came into view, he had no idea how long he had remained in that state. He willed his eyes to open, using what strength remained in his body, only to see a tiny red dot appear in the distance. The red dot began to grow into something bigger, slowly but surely. Seeing it grow into a tsunami wave of malevolent energy, whose sheer power he could feel even from this distance, caused his eyes to widen in shock. It was full of rage and a strong desire for bloodshed and violence. His blood. He was only able to attribute this energy to a corrupted form of chakra, whose owner soon materialized as a huge fox with 9 enormous talons and angry eyes that glared down at his form. The animal regarded him as though he were a bug that should be crushed and not be given any attention. It gave him a fierce roar and hurled a wave of its tainted chakra in his direction. Despite the unbearable pain in his body, Naruto resisted the urge to perish like an insect and used his remaining strength to carefully stand again. Were his superiors attempting to instill this tailed beast in him? They had told him that the beast would take control and annihilate him if his will to live and triumph was weaker than its. His determination to stand again in spite of his injuries caused the beast to pause and give him the most curious look possible. Although they didn't speak, Naruto's will to materialize a chakra sword in his right hand actually startled the giant fox. He glared back at the enormous beast with equal intensity. "What's your name, runt?" Naruto glared directly into the giant fox's eyes, displaying no signs of surprise at the fact that it was speaking a language he understood. Ruto 141. With a growl, the Nine-Tails questioned, "What kind of stupid name is that?" Even as he tightened his hold on his sword, Naruto said gravely, "My name. And you must be the Nine-Tailed Fox." In the sea of chakra that surrounded it, the beast smashed its powerful tails and narrowed its eyes, sending monstrous waves that surged directly at Naruto. The fact that the boy ran directly at it rather than fleeing made it even more amused. Earth style. Rising boulder. For the first time, the runt appeared on top of a massive rock formation that was higher than the Nine-Tailed Fox's chakra wave, shocking him. The boy had already leapt off the hardened rock before the chakra wave even struck it. The beast was even more shocked when the boy vanished, and it hurled 4 of its tails forward in rage to smash the bothersome runt. He discovered that his adversary had moved to a different one of his tails, causing the beast to growl fiercely and bring it down to slam the boy before vanishing once more and reappearing on a different tail. He moves quickly. The blonde menace kept hopping from tail to tail, trying to get closer to the giant fox, no matter how hard it tried to grab the boy. The fox never saw a glimmer of fear in the runt's resolute blue eyes, proving that the child was braver than it had anticipated. A monstrous wave of chakra erupted from the fox's mouth in desperation and rage, destroying its adversary. The boy had produced multiple kunai in his left hand and launched them into the air in retaliation. He avoided being torn to pieces by the chakra bomb by replacing himself with one of the kunai at the last second. Upon sealing, this human was surprised to find that his superiors had mentally prepared him to battle a tailed beast in their mindscape. Being ready was one thing, but facing a tailed beast in single combat was quite another. "Die already, runt!" roared the Nine-Tailed Fox angrily as it used one of its tails to swat away the boy's flurry of kunai. When the boy who was going directly at the fox cut a small piece of the tail that protected his face with his chakra sword, it felt a burning pain run through its body and its eyes widened. The Spartan stabbed a kunai laced with ninja wire across the beast's neck before the fox roared angrily, unleashing wild wind torrents that sent the boy sailing away. If only he could immobilize the beast with some hideous chains. When a chakra chain sprang from Naruto's left arm and encircled one of the fox's legs in an iron-like grasp, Naruto was taken aback. Could he create anything he wanted in this domain for the battle using his inner mindscape? The enormous fox was equally astounded and was giving him a slightly more hostile look. "The Uzumaki bloodline. I see why they chose you as my host." With a vicious yank of the chain, the beast sent Naruto hurtling toward one of its other paws, where it was about to be crushed. At the last second, he avoided the crushing blow by willing the chain to come loose from his left arm. A thought was growing in his head. He rushed through a few more stomping attempts before leaping high and emerging behind the beast's back. He launched another chakra chain with his left arm, which pierced the fox's asshole and caused it to howl in pain. He then launched another chakra chain forward with his right arm, which wound around the fox's back legs. The beast lost its balance and fell backwards with a loud crash as he slammed back to the ground and tugged with all his strength. His vision became blurry before he could launch another attack, and as his remaining strength dwindled, he staggered unsteadily, unable to find his balance. As it struggled to stand again, the beast gave him a fierce glare, which only strengthened the chakra chains that were stuck in its legs and ass. As his consciousness began to wane, Naruto fell to his knees and swore at his own frailty. He saw a number of enormous gate-sized objects fall from the dark sky directly onto the beast, causing it to howl even louder, before he faded back into oblivion. Captain Nono looked at the completed 8-trigram seal on Naruto's reddish-tinted belly and sighed with relief as the sealing process finally came to an end. She saw how close they had come to failure as she looked at the 4 severely injured sealing masters lying nearby. Although the tailed beasts had consented to be sealed into a few Spartan candidates, Admiral Orochimaru had forewarned her that if the candidate was judged weak or lacked a strong will of its own, the host would be rejected. The Nine-Tailed Fox was the most infamous of them, and it was a wonder that its ceiling was finished at all. Had Ruto 141 not battled it with what little strength and resolve remained in him, it would not have been possible. Although the boy was unable to defeat the beast, he had bought Nono and her team enough time to seal the monster. Based on the lessons learned from this entire operation, she could only hope that the remaining candidates had an easier time going through the process. After 4 months, standing in her control room, Captain Nono gazed solemnly at the holoscreen in front of her, which showed the outcome of their entire operation. She cast her eyes down in grief and shame, and the man next to her responded. Sergeant Danzo stated without hesitation that augmentations and the sealing process was always a vital but dangerous stage. How many, Sergeant? She sadly inquired. 95 deceased, 13 incapacitated permanently and 12 brain dead. Nearly 45% of the candidates, Danzo calmly stated. When Nono saw the faces of all the nearly 13-year-olds she had killed in this pursuit, she clenched her fist shut to keep the tears from streaming down her cheeks. Children, Sergeant Danzo. 45% of the children, she replied sadly. Only 150 of the 270 Spartans who had made it through training and entered this operation were still alive. Despite Ruto 141's choice to volunteer first and Nano's team's best efforts, the force, which had previously been split up into 3 companies Alpha, Bravo, and Delta was now only strong enough for 1 company. Notwithstanding the consequences, she believed that the sealing of the tailed beasts and their tainted chakra had resulted in the majority of the casualties. She wondered how the rest of the Spartans would handle the terrible loss. It was still difficult for Sasuke to adjust to the changes his body had experienced in the last 4 months. He was over 6 feet tall and had a muscular build that would make many elite wrestlers or shinobi blush, even though he was only 13 a week ago like many others. He had to go through weeks of therapy and rehabilitation to learn how to use his new body after surviving the hell that was the augmentation and sealing of pieces of the tailed beast chakra inside his body. As all 150 of the Spartans who were still alive stood in the hangar bay of battlecruiser Dauntless, now in their ceremonial military uniform, the same was true for his fellow survivors of that hell. They all faced Sergeant Danzo Shimura, who was standing in front of them in a similar uniform but with a lot more medals on his chest, as they stood at attention. The 95 pods with the bodies of their fallen comrades, prepared for cremation in the nearby Sun Savitar, were behind him. The way of a shinobi is self-sacrifice, Danzo declared sternly. As Sasuke lay cold in those escape pods, he couldn't help but think of the friends he had grown up and fought with. His eyes strayed to the now 6'5" Ruto 141 standing stoically next to him. However, Sasuke saw nothing but anguish and remorse for not saving so many people in his eyes, which conveyed a different message. He glanced around, reminded once more that not even Noble Team had survived this. When he looked at the pod, he saw the body of Tayuya-57, who had died during the augmentation process, leaving Noble Team with only 7 members left, a miracle given that many other squads from the 3 companies had been completely destroyed. These shinobi paid the ultimate price, bringing us one step closer towards victory. We shall remember our fallen, honors attention, instructed Danzo. Sasuke finally witnessed a single tear escape Ruto's eyes as the remaining Spartans saluted their fallen. We commit the bodies of our fallen to the sun in the hopes of them reemerging from its flames once again in a new life to give humanity strength. As the remainder of the class continued to salute, the ship launched all of the pods containing the Spartan fallen's bodies into space in response to those words. Sasuke saw the ships moving directly toward Savitar's blazing conflagration as the engines in the pods began to run. He noticed that each of his comrades was impacted by the deaths in a different way. It was difficult to forget the fundamental friendships and allegiances formed over the previous few years of bloodshed and sweat, even after death. Neji and Samui were keeping their composure, but Gaara and Darui appeared solemn. Pakura, on the other hand, appeared heartbroken after losing one of her closest friends along with numerous other cherished allies. He discovered Ruto yelling at Sergeant Danzo, who was directing the departure of the brain-dead and disabled Spartan candidates, as the ceremony came to a close. Sasuke sensed danger and chased after Ruto to prevent him from doing something he would later come to regret. Ruto, who was now easily taller than Danzo, asked sharply, "Where are you taking our comrades?" without even making the seasoned instructor flinch. As Sasuke rushed to join them, Danzo responded bluntly, "They can't fight anymore, the Navy will take care of them. For those of them who make any recovery, we will find roles that do not put them on the battlefield." Sasuke observed Ruto's acrid fist clenching as he gazed at the retreating figure of their wounded being escorted by support staff. Ruto found this decision very difficult to accept as a Spartan who never abandoned any of his comrades. His next question to the sergeant showed his helplessness. "I am company commander, sir. Members of my squad, my company, my class died or worse. Is there anything I could have done more to stop that?" saddened Ruto. When the always icy Sergeant Danzo finally put a firm hand on Ruto's shoulder and gave them both a serious look, Sasuke was taken aback. "You did all you could, son. What your class went through, the fact that so many of you survived, is a testament to your strength and sacrifice," replied Danzo with integrity. With solemnity, Sasuke asked, "Was this worth it, sir?" "The mission is all that matters." Ruto 141 and SASUKE 297. Saving humanity from extinction against the Otsutsuki would require many more such sacrifices. This was a painful blow, but one that would eventually help us get one step closer to victory. The sacrifice of your comrades has given you the strength to truly face our enemies on equal footing, stated Danzo. Ruto and Sasuke were left to reflect on those fateful words after the sergeant left to continue his duties. As they stood around the empty spot where Tayuya's pod had been, they noticed Darui, Gaara, Neji, and Samui attempting to comfort the sobbing Pakura. It forced them both to return to Noble Team in order to grieve for their fallen comrade. Even before they entered the war, they had realized the seriousness of what loss really was. Pakura lamented, "Tayuya was my friend, a sister in all but blood." "She was our sister," Gaara added empathetically. Recalling their team's potty-mouthed fighter who could outswear even the Otsutsuki herself with her colorful language, Sasuke forced back the lump that was growing in his throat at the thought. They all felt untouchable, invulnerable, and immortal due to their training, augmentations, and strength. They were soberly reminded of their own mortality by this reality. Neji said softly, "Tayuya would want us to avenge her the only way we can." "In a sea of our enemy's blood," Darui nodded firmly in agreement. Sasuke noticed that everyone on the team was now staring at Ruto and himself, who had been ranked as Noble 1 and Noble 2 by their superiors based on their performance and leadership abilities. "We will be getting deployed to the front lines in a few weeks once the last of our adjustments and training is completed," replied Ruto calmly. Samui asked inquisitively, "Really? An actual fight against the enemy?" And Sasuke nodded. "High Command wants to see us in action first in preparation for a major operation later is what we have been told so far," stated Sasuke. Pakura weakly joked, knowing Tayuya, she would swear to the high heavens for missing it. "She's right here." When they heard Ruto say that, they all turned to face him and saw him carrying Tayuya's dog tags near his chest in his arm. His gaze was fixed on the vast area that led to the sun of the system, where Tayuya's pod was eventually going. "As long as a single noble is alive, she will never be forgotten. Through us, she will seek the vengeance against our enemies. All of us will make sure of that," determined Ruto. As they all stood together, watching their comrade's final farewell in the distance, he saw the same resolve dawn in each of the other Noble Team members' eyes one by one. In remembrance of everything they had lost, they would soon be thrust into the crucible of war. After 8 months, after almost 4 years of waiting, Admiral Tobarama Senju looked tiredly at the specifics of the next mission he and the reinforced Fifth Fleet were to undertake. Their civilian leadership prioritized restoring them to full strength because they were the fleet that had achieved humanity's sole victory against the Otsutsuki Empire. Despite Tobarama's best efforts, it had taken 4 years to replenish such a large number of vessels after he lost half of them in the Battle of Freedom. As he reflected on his career's only triumph, he couldn't help but think of Captain Kushina Uzumaki and her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze, who, along with thousands of other service members, had given their lives to enable Tobarama to defeat their adversaries. Their victory over the Otsutsuki had been made possible by the sacrifice of those Terran Federation heroes, but it had all been for nothing when their adversaries returned in great numbers to permanently destroy the colony. High Command had ordered Admiral Tobarama and his exhausted Fifth Fleet to abandon the colony of Freedom, their only symbol of victory, after they had fought valiantly to save it. It made his subsequent mission to defend Ngan, a shipbuilding community, all the more important. In a war that lasted more than 10 years, the Otsutsuki had already destroyed all of humanity's outer colonies. They were now advancing on the inner colonies, which were crucial to the Terran Federation military, which mainly relied on them for major resources that were previously largely provided by the now destroyed outer colonies. With enormous shipbuilding yards that produced ships and weapons for the Terran Navy, Ngan was a world that was almost 3 times as large as the colony of Freedom. High Command had given Tobirama another impossible mission because losing it would be a devastating blow from which humanity would be very difficult to recover. In addition to being a vital planet for one of the biggest shipbuilding yards of Asimov Aeronautics and Engineering, the top shipbuilding company in the Federation, the Fifth Fleet was now entrusted with protecting the besieged world, which had a population of almost 2 billion. The fact that Supreme Commander Madara had just completed restoring the Fifth Fleet to full strength, with many of its newer edition ships sporting improved armor, upgraded energy weapons, and an ample supply of manpower, was Tobirama's saving grace. In addition, he commanded 3 battalions of the notorious 105th Shock Troopers Division and entire divisions of the Army, Marines, and Air Force. He was appreciative of the additional strength, but he was more worried about the arrival of another group that the Office of Naval Intelligence itself had assigned to him than he was about the strong enemy presence that was waiting for them. He was displeased that they had circumvented him in order to persuade Supreme Commander Madara to send out their troops to the colony world of Ngan, even though he had always reluctantly respected the work done by humanity's covert branch to maintain it. He ought to have made that choice, particularly since he was barely informed about these Oni forces. He could still clearly remember his acrid discussion of that subject with the Supreme Commander only hours before. Tobirama boldly remarked, "I'm not sure this is the right call, Supreme Commander," to which the seasoned Uchiha warrior responded with a weary sigh. "Normally, I would leave deployment of personnel strictly under your purview, Admiral. But Oni has been adamant on deploying their troops groundside at the earliest alongside the shock troopers and other forces. They have pulled a lot of strings both in the military and civilian government to make this happen," Madara Uchiha tiredly stated. Tobirama frowned heavily and asked, "Since when has saving colonies through direct intervention become Ona's operating procedure?" Madara rubbed his temple in exasperation. "What I am about to tell you is on a confidential basis. I hope you know what that means, Admiral." Knowing that if Tobirama revealed the information he was about to learn, only disaster would await him, he froze. The Supreme Commander took him seriously because of the cautious nod he returned. "Oni has informed us and the government recently that they have been working on a secret project since the past 4 years. The Spartan program is a highly classified operation that has now reached its final stage with its personnel ready for combat deployments. Myself and the government are already pulling them up for this serious breach of protocol, but Oni has in its defense asked us to see the results of their labor before passing judgment. Admiral Orochimaru has risked his own neck on the performance of the personnel headed your way," Madara went on to explain. "The Spartan program, sir? It must be really something for a canny man like Admiral Orochimaru to risk his neck like that," said Tobirama carefully. "He has offered his own life as punishment should the results not be worth the breach of regulations made by his department. Hashirama has agreed to give the man the chance despite being quite angered. Now you realize how serious this is?" Madara asked with a stern face. Tobirama nodded because, considering the agency's reputation, it was no small accomplishment for the head of Oni to risk his life and the future of his entire department. "Understood, sir. The Fifth Fleet will follow your orders. Can I at least know the number of Oni personnel we will need to account for?" seriously asked Tobirama. 150. If Tobirama had been taken aback previously, he was now in utter disbelief since he could not fathom how the head of Oni, in his infinite wisdom, had believed that a company's worth of employees would be sufficient to defeat a vast world like Ngan. His expression of disbelief must have been very obvious, prompting the Supreme Commander to issue a warning. "Do not underestimate these Spartans, Admiral. I have seen some of the information related to their program presented by Admiral Orochimaru. They can prove to be some real bad news for the enemy. Use them well," told Madara bluntly. Since such consideration from a man like Madara himself was not to be taken lightly, Tobirama could only respond with a firm nod. He was waiting for Ona's Spartans to arrive in the hangar bay of his flagship, Battleship Colossus, with just 2 armed guards by his side. As required by the Supreme Commander, the remaining staff members of this specific hangar were asked to leave the area in order to preserve the secrecy. His XO told Tobirama that the heavy transport-class ship, Hercules, was prepared to dock 15 minutes before their scheduled arrival, so he didn't have to wait long. After giving his approval, the ship entered the hangar bay without incident a short while later. A few seconds later, as the ship anchored itself, the doors of the troop bay opened, and the veteran admiral stood firm, telling his tense guards to hold back. Admiral Tobirama had served in the military for many years, but he had never seen or anticipated what emerged from the ship. When a man over 7 feet tall wearing a brand new type of armor that had never been seen before entered the hangar bay, his guards were equally astounded. More than 100 people of all sizes, all wearing similar armor, followed him, but none were as tall and commanding as the first Spartan. Even the smallest of these arriving Spartans, according to Tobarama, was almost 6 feet 5 inches tall and had a physique that would have caused even the most ferocious Otsutsuki to pause. The tallest Spartan also proved to be its leader, as the rest of the force gathered around him silently and turned to face Tobarama and his guards, forcing them to straighten up a bit. The newly arrived Spartans marched towards the admiral, forcing him to hold his breath as they did so with perfect discipline and unity. As the enormous monsters came to a halt a reasonable distance from the commander of the Fifth Fleet, the two guards surrounding Tobarama stiffened even more and tightened their hold on their weapons. Upon the action of their leader, who wore only the number 141 emblazoned on his armored chest, these Spartans respectfully saluted the admiral, in contrast to many Oni personnel who are notorious for being arrogant and lacking the discipline to follow the military chain of command. The Spartan leader dutifully stated, "Commander Ruto 141 and Ona's Spartan forces reporting for duty, Admiral." Admiral Tobarama felt the Spartan's voice was too young, even though he was a large, powerful man with a high rank. Ruto 141 hardly sounded like an adult, even if it was coming from the armored suit he was wearing. He couldn't help but wonder what Oni had done behind everyone's backs. With a nod from the Spartan commander, Admiral Tobarama said gravely, "Welcome aboard, Commander. I am Admiral Tobarama, leader of the Fifth Fleet. Have you been briefed on your mission parameters?" Commander Ruto responded bluntly, "We are prepared to serve at your command, sir. We are here to aid the Fifth Fleet in defending Ngan at all costs." Tobarama wisely remarked, "Glad to hear that. I hope you and your Spartans will not have difficulty in following my leadership, the same as Oni." To their credit, however, not a single Spartan even batted an eye at the inconspicuous statement. As a result, he questioned whether these soldiers were truly human, despite the leader's voice implying otherwise. "We are honored to follow your command, sir. We await your orders," Ruto said solemnly, and the seasoned admiral finally nodded in agreement. "Very well. As per High Command's directive, the Fifth Fleet is already en route to Ngan as we speak. We shall be reaching the planet in less than 10 hours, till that time my marines here will get you settled in your quarters. Once we arrive in the sector, I will relay your mission orders after I have the facts of the real-time situation on the ground," told Tobarama. "Understood, Admiral. We shall stand by for further orders." Tobarama nodded one last time and motioned his marines to lead the Spartans to their separate section of the ship. Supreme Commander Madara made the wise decision to keep these unfamiliar and new troops apart from the other forces on board until it was absolutely necessary. Tobarama scowled as he observed the Spartans trailing his marines to their compartment, hardly making a sound with their footsteps despite their enormous armored bodies. There was something strange about them that really irritated Tobarama. When the Admiral of the Fifth Fleet received an urgent call from the head of Oni himself just 2 hours before they were scheduled to arrive at their destination, his suspicions were confirmed. Despite having the same rank and being the younger brother of the leader of the Terran Federation, Tobarama Senju was aware that Orochimaru held a higher position in the chain of command because of his agency's subtly beneficial contribution to the war effort. He quickly accepted the call for this reason, in part to obtain some clarification on the enormous monsters Oni had forced upon him. Orochimaru smiled with satisfaction and said, "It's good to see you, Admiral Tobarama." Tobarama responded sarcastically, "Admiral Orochimaru, I wish I could say the same, but you have left a Spartan question at my doorstep, which caused the pale man to grin with satisfaction. I had a feeling you might have some apprehensions, which is the reason behind this call. From preliminary reports, the enemy resistance at Ngan is quite heavy. An entire Otsutsuki fleet and millions of ground forces. Suffice to say you are going to be outnumbered in both ground and space warfare. While Oni can't magically spawn fleets to aid you, regardless we have decided to offer you our finest personnel for assistance," replied Orochimaru with a smile, making Tobarama severely. Orochimaru nodded and moved a file to the Tobarama's personal datapad when the Fifth Fleet Admiral cautiously asked, "What exactly are they trained in?" Tobarama froze at the first classification, mass destructive weapons. The list continued with search and rescue, advanced recon, planetary evacuation and reclamation, offensive raids, infiltration and sabotage, and counter-terrorism. The Spartans were proficient in a variety of fighting techniques, including weapons experts, communications and hacking, genjutsu, taijutsu, fuinjutsu, ninjutsu, and demolitions. A small number of them were even certified to fly fighter aircraft, such as frigates, and they were certified to drive all ground-based vehicles. Tobarama paled even at the way they arrived on the battlefield. "You can't be serious, Orochimaru," he exclaimed incredulously, removing the rank completely, but it did nothing but cause the pale-faced man to stop smiling. I have staked my life on it, Admiral Tobirama. My Spartans can handle whatever the enemy has in store, including facing the Otsutsuki themselves should they appear on the battlefield. Throw them in the thick of fighting. They are our finest weapons, worth far more than entire battalions of shock troopers under your command, Orochimaru bluntly stated. Tobirama questioned with concern, then why risk them so openly and so many at the same time? This battle is not just a test of their resolve and dependability for something much greater later, but also a clear message for our enemy. We want them to experience fear like humanity has all these years. The fact that it is you, the famed hero, who handed the Otsutsuki their only defeat leading this mission only adds a cherry on top of the cake, said Orochimaru with a threatening grin. There is something going on way above my clearance level. I can feel it even if you and the Supreme Commander refuse to say it out loud. Do not take me for a fool, Admiral. What exactly are you expecting of this entire operation? Tobirama asked sorrowfully and with a deafening. Evacuation of the shipbuilding assets which are critical to our navy along with the population is the primary mission objective. The enemy hordes are descending upon both of them in droves. My recommendation would be to tactically use the Spartans as a shield first to stop that, followed by as a vengeful spear that carves through the enemy. This might be their first military operation, but my Spartans can help you turn the tide of this upcoming battle, even score a victory if you use them wisely. Humanity and Oni wishes you good luck, Admiral Tobirama. Tobirama cursed silently as the transmission ended before he could reply or ask any more questions. He still had a lot more questions than he had before, but he also couldn't deny that he had gotten some crucial information about what these Spartans were capable of, at least on paper for the time being, and with the head of Oni himself assuring him. He had a suspicion that some of those assertions might be validated, which added to the understated assurance he had noticed in Madara's logic. Colony of Ngan, New Era's capital, 4 hours later. For almost 10 years, Captain Kakashi Hitaki had served with the Shock Troopers Division. He began as a private and advanced through the ranks fairly quickly, in part because of his abilities and leadership qualities, but also because the Shock Troopers suffered a high death toll because they were the best humanity had to offer and were frequently thrown headfirst against the enemy. Since Red Team was the last remaining member of the storied 7th Battalion of Shock Troopers, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze, he regarded the group of shock troopers surrounding him as fellow survivors. Kakashi and his team had only survived because they had all suffered severe injuries in an earlier operation on the Colony of Freedom, while the rest of Red Team's battalion, under the command of Minato, had made a valiant suicidal charge that dealt the Otsutsuki their lone defeat. Because of that, Red Team survived and was now part of the 10th Shock Troopers Battalion, whereas their valiant Lieutenant Colonel and the rest of their battalion's members had perished. Every member of Red Team, including Kakashi, had pleaded with Minato to allow them to join him on his last mission, even though it rendered combat useless, but their leader had smiled and refused. Red Team members Kakashi and Obito Uchiha, who had served with Minato since the man was a lowly lieutenant rank officer, were particularly hurt by the rejection. The two younger men had been deeply impacted by seeing their friend and mentor go into certain death while they were powerless to stop it. The 7th Battalion must live on, not just in memory but in the hearts of each member of Red Team. I am counting on you, Kakashi. Even though he and Red Team were among the 10th Battalion's most successful squads, Kakashi's heart was still touched by his mentor's final words. He pondered how long he would be able to fulfill his mentor's final request as he hid beneath one of the restaurant's concrete walls. With a frown, he ordered, "Obito, burn those ghosts quickly," as the Otsutsuki's walking tanks continued to fire heavy weapons at his position. His longtime friend and squadmate retorted in frustration, little occupied right now with these pesky grunts, as he engaged in fierce firefighting with almost a dozen yammering grunts. The squad leader of Red Team ordered, "Asuma, blind them." Before he clicked his teeth and set scores of grunts and arachnids in a fiery conflagration, the hefty Sarutobi warrior smiled as he unleashed a hail of ash form of chakra throughout the battlefield. Asuma teased, "Thought you Uchihas were experts with fire." Obito gave her a humorous glare. "Cover me." Obito was able to charge forward out of the ditch he had taken cover in when Kakashi and Asuma leaned out to fire a concentrated hail of assault weapons fire upon the heavily armored ghosts. Fire style. Fireball's jutsu. The fighter from the Uchiha clan earned his salary when he threw a dozen enormous fireballs that struck the two ghosts directly and destroyed them. With a smile on his face, Obito was about to duck under cover again when he ducked from a barrage of bullets that, had his Sharingan not been alert, would have severed his head. Grumpily, Obito cursed, "Anko, kill those newer snipers already." In her typical arrogant way, their team's sniper responded, "Stop complaining, I'm coming." Obito smirked and teased, "You know that sounded wrong on every level." Anko's sole response came in the form of a string of precise shots that caused two newer officers in charge of this region to fall dead from their rooftop posts. "Heads up guys, I've got scores of bugs heading our way," advised Anko. Kakashi took the order seriously and quickly received a number of acknowledgements. "Kurenai, mess up their vision. Anko, support fire. Rest of you charge on my signal." A horde of almost 100 Arcanids were marching toward them with vengeance up ahead on the boulevard. Kurenai caused the others in the lead to crash into them after they abruptly stopped. As Kakashi led the rest of Red Team in a fearless charge, Anko was already driving holes into the beast's maws. Lightning style. Shockwave. The leader of Red Team let loose lightning bolts that pierced through the masses of enormous insects, causing agonized cries and the stench of charred flesh, among other unpleasant smells. The entire frontal line of bugs was mercilessly burned by the stream of flames that Obito and Asumi released from their mouths, deciding they could not put up with it much longer. Kakashi launched his next attack despite the enemy's cries. Chidori. While the rest of his squadmates used their chakra swords to engage in closer quarters combat, Kakashi's lightning-style blade sliced clean through the exposed mouths and torso of multiple bugs, sending them to the afterlife. Asuma and Obito carried out the butcher's work while Anko and Kurenai supplied support fire to help them navigate through the pile of enemy bodies, while Yugo led the butchery with her lethal kenjutsu techniques that quickly cut dozens of bugs into pieces. The remaining Otsutsuki forces in the region were quickly and completely destroyed as Red Team carefully conducted a thorough sweep to make sure the enemy had no more surprises in store. Incoming message from Neptune Actual, Captain, Kurenai, the team's radio operator and air support specialist, was notified the news. As he connected his communication device to the incoming transmission, Kakashi nodded. "How is it going on your end, Red Team?" Colonel Shikaku Nara, the commander of the 10th Shock Troopers Battalion, asked in his ever-calm voice. "Sanshi Boulevard, Neptune Actual, is now under our control. The evacuation route in the western zone is clear, and all enemy forces have been neutralized," Captain Kakashi reported. "Great job. The remaining routes leading to the starport have been secured by the remainder of our 10th and 22nd battalions, with assistance from Army Marines and mechanized forces. Your new orders are to relink with us at starport, as the 43rd Battalion is occupied with fending off the majority of enemy forces in the city center. With the ships already there and the ones the Navy will send our way, we will be erecting defensive lines around it to start the civilian evacuations in the AO," Shikaku stated gravely. "With knowledge," Kakashi said, "the enemy will try to disrupt that, sir. The rest of the command staff and I agree, which is why we are directing all nearby forces to defend it. Although their main responsibility is to transport the civilians for evacuation, the Army and Marine forces will do everything in their power to assist us." Shikaku was advised that the starport's defense would be the primary responsibility of the 10th and 22nd Battalion of Shock Troopers. "I get it, sir. We'll be there to help soon," Kakashi nodded in agreement. "Get to it, Red Team," the flagship Colossus a few hours later. Not that their training would allow any of the Spartans to express their displeasure aloud, but Ruto 141 and the rest of the Spartans found themselves facing the Admiral of the 5th Fleet in a large conference room after a lengthy wait for further orders. However, it appeared that the moment had finally come for them to intervene in the existential conflict facing humanity. Admiral Tobarama took a long look at each of them before starting his briefing. "While the majority of our ground forces have been deployed throughout the planet to help with evacuations and secure the shipyards along with other critical assets, the 5th Fleet is currently exerting every effort to repel the enemy fleet. Despite fierce enemy resistance, the shock troopers, Army, and Marines are making every effort to establish evacuation zones throughout Ngan's 3 main continents. In order to provide assistance throughout the world, I have made the decision to divide your force into small tactical teams." As he pointed to the various action points throughout the planet of Ngan, Tobarama explained in detail. "Some teams will be tasked with securing the shipyards alongside other friendly forces, while the rest will be focused on holding the line against enemy counterattacks on civilian evacuation zones. As the situation on the planet forced Spartans to be deployed across several continents and battlefields to support hard-pressed friendly forces on the ground, we will hold the line and secure the assets," Admiral reassured Ruto 141. When the Spartans' new mission objectives and their means of deployment to those zones appeared on the corresponding HUD in their visor, Ruto 141 turned to face the different squad leaders in their group, each of whom gave a single nod to confirm their agreement. Let's get this done, Spartans. Despite this being their first battle, Admiral Tobarama watched with curiosity as the Spartan commander only made a brief statement to his troops rather than a motivational speech. To his ongoing fascination, however, that was sufficient for Ona's new warriors, as they all saluted him, forcing Tobarama to return the gesture, and then the Spartans scattered to complete their individual missions. The Spartans left the room in a spooky silence, with no joking between them. Tobarama stopped Ruto 141 and his noble team just as they were ready to leave. According to some information I received from Admiral Orochimaru, noble team is among the best squads. For this reason, I am sending you to New Era, the capital of the planet. The enemy's invasion killed half of its 50 million residents. Groundside forces under the command of shock troopers have taken control of the nearby starport and started evacuations, but they are facing a fierce counterattack from multiple enemy divisions, including a sizable force of cannibals in addition to the typical Otsutsuki rank and file. We hardly have 3,000 troops protecting the starport when we combine 2 shock troopers battalion with sporadic army and marine companies. I'm afraid they won't get there in time, even though we are assigning more reinforcements to help. Despite my doubts about your level of competence, I am forced to put my faith in the chain of command. Can you hold the line? Millions of lives depend on us maintaining control of the starport. Tobarama asked gravely. He was dwarfed by Commander Ruto, who stood resolutely alongside the rest of his team. Your evacuation area will be guarded, sir. I can see why you might be hesitant, but let our behavior speak for itself. Ruto confidently declared, we are dedicated to ensuring the survival of as many civilians and fellow soldiers as possible. Tobarama responded, I'll hold you to that, Commander, and Ruto nodded firmly as he and noble team turned to march out. Ruto was about to leave when he paused and turned to face the seasoned admiral. We'll make it count, sir. As Ruto 141 fulfilled his pledge, the door shut, giving Admiral Tobarama newfound assurance. New Era. The starport's defensive lines. The enemy had attacked from all sides. After steamrolling through the army and marine forces fighting in the eastern and southern parts of the capital, the Otsutsuki forces appeared to emerge from the buildings and sewer exits surrounding the starport like a tidal wave, joined by thousands upon thousands of additional reinforcements. Only the 10th and 22nd Shock Trooper Battalions, 4 Marine companies, and 3 Army battalions with limited mechanized support remained as the only line of defense surrounding the starport, while the 43rd Shock Trooper Battalion of the 105th Division frantically attempted to halt a similar enemy advance in the city's northern sector. To repel the enemy, every Marine and Army trooper, as well as every tank and armored fighting vehicle still in service, was sent to the front lines along the southern, western, and eastern flanks close to the starport, led by Colonels Shikaku Nara and Inoichi Yamanaka, respectively, of the 10th and 22nd Battalions of Shock Troopers. Even so, the task appeared nearly impossible because the enemy hordes outnumbered the defenders by a ratio of almost 10 to 1. Troopers, keep the line. The senior officer in charge of defending the western flank close to the starport, Captain Kakashi, urged. In response to the orders, Red Team and a number of other shock troopers winked their green lights. Several of them quickly set up trench lines and sought shelter behind the Terran Federation's demolished Nightmare tanks to escape the intense enemy fire that was heading their way. When he saw multiple companies of Arcanids and Grunts charging toward their defensive line with cries of bloodthirst, Kakashi cursed. Allow them to approach. The rest of you can then open up with everything you have after I break their charge, ordered by Kakashi. Mr. Before slamming his hands to the ground, he waited until the enemy had advanced almost 100 yards to their defensive line. Style Earth. Shockwave. Every living thing on both sides lost their balance due to the violent shaking of the ground, but it also gave the Terran forces an advantage as the enemy charge faltered and Arcanids and Grunts collided after losing their balance. The enormous bugs ultimately killed dozens of their smaller, gas mask-wearing comrades in friendly fire. Now, a wave of fire-style attacks was launched by a dozen shock troopers, backed by precise sniper fire from Enko and her group of snipers in the back, dozens of rocket launchers, and suppressive fire from almost 200 assault rifles. As the human forces carried out the ruthless massacre, Arcanids were either burned alive or ripped to bloody pieces in a raging conflagration, just like their grunt comrades. Even as another huge wave of enemy forces renewed the destroyed charge of their earlier counterparts, Kakashi's own snipers responded with vengeance, and he cursed when 2 Marines and 4 shock troopers fell with bullet-sized holes in their faces due to the enemy's counter-sniper fire. Banshees are coming. Yugo cautioned, while the rocket launcher troopers were ordered to bring down the incoming enemy aircraft. Kakashi had to rush to order his troops to begin erecting Fuinjutsu-aided earthen barriers on the double when Otsutsuki ground support aircraft arrived. The effort was further complicated by a renewed enemy ground assault wave that started their charge. A few suicidal pilots stayed their course and fired their fuel rods on the left flank of the human defensive line, but most of the Banshee's squadron started evasive maneuvers to avoid a fiery death as rockets flew in droves towards them. The screams of dying Marines and shock troopers blended with the rest of the fighting taking place on the battlefield as they were engulfed in flaming flames. In order to drive back the enemy's new wave of assault that had gotten too close for comfort, Kakashi had to lead a countercharge in return with the majority of Red Team and a few other shock troopers. Their losses began to mount as Kakashi's own forces were killed by enemy sniper fire or close-quarters fighting, despite their swift defeat of dozens of Arcanids and Grunts. To all forces, this is Colonel Shikaku Nara. On the double, retreat to the second defensive line. A cannibal horde is on its way. Aside from the Otsutsuki themselves, Kakashi saw the arrival of humanity's most dreaded adversaries, so the order to retreat came a bit too late. Kakashi's vanguard faced a more serious attack even as they fought back against the enemy's diminishing wave of assault. Kakashi. Obito, who was fighting next to Kakashi, kicked him violently to the side as he was slicing through one of the Arcanid giant bugs with his blade, and the Sharingan with Uchiha was struck by the full force of a corrupted chakra energy ball that pierced through the Arcanid Kakashi had been fighting earlier. After being launched dozens of meters into the air, Obito landed in their defensive trench line with no grace. The entire human vanguard was subjected to similar attacks, with the Terran fighters being mercilessly struck and sent to the afterlife by the sharp spikes and chakra balls that ripped through the Otsutsuki forces. Kakashi noticed the motivation behind this attack, which did not distinguish between fighters from either side, out of the corner of his eye. He saw an entire cannibal horde arrive on the battlefield, and his heart was filled with pure terror. The cannibals were quadrupedal carnivorous animals that were noticeably white because they lacked skin pigment. They were about 9 feet tall, wider, and more muscular than any human fighter, and they had a hunched appearance as they stood on 4 legs with their 2 front arms tucked under their chests. They also had 2 tentacle-like limbs that emerged from the upper rear of their backs, and each of their 3 toe-like pads had razor-sharp claws. They had multiple tentacles to unleash their most devastating attacks, and their backs had sharp spikes. Precision strikes and supersonic bombs were laced with corrupted chakra. The presence of a cannibal squad was frightening on any battlefield. The arrival of an entire horde was a death sentence. The cannibals were forces of pure destruction that were unleashed on the battlefield to rain death upon anyone who stood in their way, never distinguishing between friend and foe. With a large mouth full of sharp teeth and a wicked noseplate that had devoured countless humans in previous battles, he gazed at their terrifying faces. A significant portion of the cannibal horde readied themselves to charge as they prepared to unleash a tsunami of chakra bombs. Kakashi was only able to give his remaining forces one word of instruction. Run. On the holoscreen in their command center, Colonels Shikaku Nara and Inoichi Yamanaka were observing the retreat order across the whole first defensive line with resentment. A horde of cannibals mercilessly unleashed a terrifying charge that was followed by thousands and thousands of Arcanids, Grunts, Nurs, and Ghosts. The heroic deed prevented a total collapse of their front, but those valiant shinobi met a terrible end when the cannibal horde tore them apart limb by limb or simply reduced them to ash in a series of chakra bombs that destroyed the entire first defensive line. In many cases, shock trooper squads stayed behind to buy time for their army, marine, and remaining fellow shock troopers to retreat back to the second line. One of the artillery officers in the headquarters immediately acknowledged Shikaku's clenched fist as he ordered, "Unleash our artillery barrage to stop the enemy charge and buy our forces time to escape." Shikaku, tanks and IFVs are prepared at the second line. The good news is that air support is occupied protecting additional enemy waves throughout the city as well as other civilian evacuation zones. According to his fellow Colonel Inoichi Yamanaka, commander of the 22nd Shock Troopers Battalion, Command has routed 2 Marine battalions and units from the 43rd Shock Troopers Battalion to our location, but they will not arrive before an hour. At this rate, we hardly have an hora just a few dozen minutes. Admiral Tobarama, come get me. Shikaku gave an urgent order, and Lieutenant Mabui nodded, contacting the 5th Fleet commander. Colonel, the Admiral is occupied with battling the enemy fleet in space. His flagship has sent us a priority message stating that he has sent out a Special Forces squad to help us. With desperation, Lieutenant Mabui reported, ETA is 10 minutes. Just one squad. Down here, we need a whole division, Colonel Inoichi said incredulously. Shikaku narrowed his eyes at the implication, wondering what a seasoned officer like Admiral Tobarama was thinking. All Terran forces in the city would be massacred if the starport was overrun, along with the remaining citizens of the capital. Against those odds, what could one Special Forces squad accomplish? Sir, we've got an incoming priority hail from the leader of the Special Forces squad dispatched by the Admiral, quickly informed Mabui. Patch them through, was Shikaku's quick order. As the connection was established and a fresh voice came through the command center, he waited expectantly. This is Commander Ruto 141, the head of the Spartan forces of Noble Team Oni. We are on our way to where you are, Starport Command. Ask your troops to retreat to the second defensive line. ETA is 10 minutes. We're coming in hot. The strange situation was further complicated by the fact that both officers, Shikaku and Inoichi, were veterans who had survived over 10 years of the Otsutsuki genocidal war, were unable to conceal their astonishment at the new message. This is Colonel Shikaku Nara, the ground commander of the Starport Defensive Zone and member of the 10th Shock Troopers Battalion, acknowledged, Spartan Commander. The enemy has a huge presence and is pursuing our forces relentlessly as they already retreat to the second defensive. I'm not sure what you're packing, but it had better be deadly or you'll die as soon as you touch down, Shikaku said gravely. We copy, Colonel. Ruto 141 finished speaking with Starport Command and looked down at the orbital entry drop pod in which he had been placed. Noble, status check, he ordered. The rest of his squad, waiting similarly across other orbital pods, gave him green lights on his visor's HUD one by one, their method of entering the battlefield changing the face of human warfare forever. The 5th Fleet flagship launched its orbital drop pods toward the planet Ngan in less than a minute. Spartan forces were being launched on a dozen battlefields throughout the planet, with similar actions occurring throughout the entire fleet. As Ruto felt his pod rapidly descending towards the planet's atmosphere, his head jerked back from the momentum, and as his pod made a forceful entry into the atmosphere, red-tinted flames began to burn against his pod's virtual screens that showed the high temperature outside. This is enjoyable, SASUKE 297 said on the squad communications, causing Darui to chuckle for a moment. The warrior with the dark skin shot back, you always were an adrenaline junkie, Uchiha. Sasuke laughed and said, I loved it during training and still do now. Ruto was only reminded of the previous few months that the Spartans had spent relearning their new bodies, learning how to use the orbital drop pod, a new technology that Oni had implemented to quickly deploy Spartans in hot zones, and learning how to fight alongside the Bijus in the cases of Ruto and Gaara, while the rest of Noble Team used the beast's chakra fragments inside their bodies. The one tail had prevented Gaara from getting much sleep, which the Spartans still had a hard time getting used to, but the 9 and 1 tails were still less than cooperative and had not attempted to kill their hosts as Oni Command had feared. Ruto could only hope that the beasts would give them strength for the upcoming battle, or else the beasts and their hosts would not fare well. He could feel the weight of Tayuya's dog tags hidden in his armor and above his chest increasing as clouds began to move through his pod's camera feed. He briefly pictured Noble Team and another 119 pods descending toward Ngan's surface. He had grown up and bled with comrades who would never be able to participate in a war for which they had given their all. Over a private channel, Samui muttered, we fight this battle in their memory, Noble -1. NOBLE3, how did you know? Ruto asked softly, because I am fighting for the same reason and for all we have lost. As the 5th Fleet transmitted visual feeds of the groundside battle to his and the Noble Team's HUD, his respect for Samui increased slightly after hearing her response, and he became more determined. While scattered shock troopers and some marine squads remained behind to give the rest of their comrades a window to retreat to the second defensive line, Gaara calmly remarked, they have it rough, as he watched the enormous enemy wave steamroll over the first defensive line near the starport. Pakura angrily retorted, we'll give the uglies down there twice over, Noble 4. In 1 minute, we'll be at the exit point. Noble 4, are you all prepared for the diamond formation? Asked Ruto sincerely. Gaara confidently responded, let's kill some Otsutsuki hordes, Noble 1, as he angled his pod to approach Ruto's position at the base of the diamond formation, positioning the 2 Jinchuriki hosts as the squad's tip of the spear. As they went deeper and closer to the surface, the seconds passed quickly, and they were met with a sky full of raging clouds. Now, the drop pod's metal doors exploded outwards in response to Ruto's command, exposing their occupants to the raging atmosphere outside. At a height of 25,000 feet, the Noble Team leapt from their flying coffins and proceeded to fall freely in the direction of their target. Ruto ordered, mark targets, Noble -2 and 5 inches, copy, simultaneously acknowledged Sasuke and Neji, respectively. Soon the dwindling green dots that indicated friendly forces were blinking out under the massive onslaught, and Naruto and Gaara's HUD was painted with a horde of enemy targets moving toward the rapidly approaching starport from various directions. Friendly forces can hold for the time being because they have a sizable number of tanks and IFVs on the eastern and southern fronts. The adversaries on the western front, which appears to be the worst, should be carpet-bombed first. After making landfall in that area, we advance with the support of allied forces towards the southern and eastern fronts. A duplicate? Really? Naruto asked. While the rest of the squad blinked their green lights in agreement with the order, Darui enthusiastically agreed. Let's tear them apart, Noble -1. As the enemy hordes attempted to run them down with brute force, Kakashi and the remnants of his forces sought refuge in the trenches of the second defensive line. Kakashi, we can't keep them around much longer. Even as he fired a dozen fireballs, setting a wave of arcanids ablaze, Asuma issued a warning. Yugo did her best to tend to the injured Uchiha while saving Kakashi's life, but she was warned. Obito's in bad shape, Captain. The defenders of the second line, with whom they had joined, were doing a little better, but Kakashi, who was panting from the effort of the battle, wondered how long they could hold this line as well after noticing that the rest of his forces who had fallen back from the first defensive line were in similar condition. Kakashi, Neptune Actual sent you a priority message. In a moment, our friends will arrive. As she conveyed the directive she had received directly from Colonel Shikaku, Kurenai reported with a desperate sense of hope. How many and from where? Only the enemy is visible to me. As he drained his magazine into a group of grunts and a newer officer ruthlessly dispatched them, Kakashi scowled. A special ops squad, they're making orbital insertion. What? Kakashi had only expressed his shock when Kurenai and numerous other soldiers gestured to the sky, causing him to look up as well. Hold fire to all Terran forces on the ground. Over an open channel, a cool-headed voice said, Spartan forces are coming in hot, and we'll wipe out the enemies in your sector. After hearing that audacious request and seeing 7 figures descend from the sky toward the very center of the enemy horde, Kakashi and Red Team were unable to conceal their shock. This is Noble One, brace for explosion. The leading voice of these new Spartans on the open channel only issued that warning before the leading Spartans unleashed 2 enormous dark orbs directly in the middle of the oncoming enemy forces. As the enormous dark orbs of violent energy slammed down on them ruthlessly, many of the cannibals, newer, grunts, arachnids, and a few ghosts looked up and froze in horror. As 2 enormous explosions tore through the enemy forces like a miniature nuclear fireball, Kakashi's vision went blank along with that of many other Terran forces. In the next shockwave, thousands of enemy forces were flung in various directions like rag dolls, while thousands more were simply vaporized in an instant. After that, there were a few more explosions, but Kakashi was still recovering his vision and cursed himself for being directly exposed to the blasts, with only the visor of his helmet keeping him from going totally blind. He forced himself to see a blur of shadows rapidly approaching their position while wearing jetpacks to slow their descent to a manageable momentum after hearing a faint whining. When Kakashi's vision returned, he was confronted by the rear of a massive armored creature. Even the other green, blue, red, and black armored soldiers that landed around the giant were taller and wider than the majority of humans in the world. Their helmets with golden visors prevented Kakashi from seeing their faces, and since the voice he had heard earlier was human, they couldn't be mechs. He was incredibly tall, standing very close to the newer, who were typically 8 feet tall. Along with the remaining Terran forces, the rest of Red Team was silently witnessing the devastation their new reinforcements had caused on the battlefield. A few hundred enemy forces remained and were attempting to rejoin the battle. Execute. Large swaths of sand and dirt rose across the battlefield as the tallest Spartan's single command caused his smaller red armored counterpart to thrust both of his hands forward, quickly turning into a sandstorm that further confused the enemy's attempts to re-enter the battle. After burying a number of newers and ghosts in sand coffins, the red armored Spartan crushed them with ruthlessness. His black armored counterpart, who was unmistakably a woman based on her appearance, unleashed a brand new sniper rifle while the red armored Spartan was wreaking havoc, making Enko want to seize the magnificent-looking weapon. The speed and lethality with which the black armored Spartan sniper began killing newer officers left the enemy ground forces with fewer leadership personnel than the red team's sniper could match. Charge. The green armored Spartan giant was reduced to a blur as the other 5 Spartans ran at dizzying speeds in the direction of the confused enemy forces. Bright shields took the brunt of the enemy fire that came their way, which simply bounced off their armor. Shields of energy. Surprised, Kakashi thought, While their squadmate with the sniper and sand took out newer officers one by one like vengeful gods passing judgment, the 5 Spartans returned an equally vengeful salvo of their own mid-charge. The rounds fired by their new rifles destroyed scores of arcanids, caused grunts to explode, and caused ghosts to crumble. Dozens upon dozens of injured and trembling enemy soldiers were crushed under the assault in less than 30 seconds. However, they faced their biggest obstacle when a sizable contingent of surviving cannibals charged directly at them in a rage. Without a glimmer of fear or hesitation, the Spartan leader charged directly at the approaching cannibals while the rest of his squad engaged the remaining enemy forces in close-quarters combat. The video feeds that Colonel Shikaku Nara, his colleague Colonel Inoichi Yamanaka, and the other staff officers were seeing on the western flank were unbelievable. With the arrival of these Spartans, the enemy had completely reversed the momentum from a guaranteed defeat of their forces on said flank. "What are they doing?" a pale-faced Lieutenant Mabui asked horrifiedly. After seeing 2 members of Noble Team launch an attack equivalent to nuclear bombs that instantly destroyed the enemy center upon arrival, Shikaku couldn't blame her fear. What came next was sheer slaughter. They could hardly keep up with these Spartans' coordinated charge and lightning-fast movements. While the remainder of their squad charged in, 2 Spartans stayed close to the second defensive line, forming an impregnable wall with the remaining human forces, continuing to wreak havoc on newer officers on the battlefield. Inoichi paid close attention to the feeds that detailed the combo attacks that Sasuke 297 and Pakura 156 launched against 2 platoons of grunts. While Sasuke 297 unleashed a violent firewave that caused the remaining grunts to explode, Pakura 156 rained down enormous fireballs that literally mummified several grunts before their gas tanks exploded under the sheer pressure. When Neji 199 defeated a whole company of arachnids by himself, he was in a different league. That's a Hyuga. When Shikaku saw the blue-armored Spartan employing the notorious Baikugan attacks to either rip apart any arachnid that attempted to skewer him or send them sailing away like rag dolls, he whispered in realization. On the other hand, Darui 183 was causing intense lightning strikes to fall straight down from the sky onto a number of ghosts. This either completely fried the Otsutsuki's living tanks or rendered them immobile enough for Darui to puncture their heavily armored heads with clean bullet holes. With great prejudice, each Spartan of the Noble Team had selected their targets and was working diligently to eliminate them all. But their leader had made the decision to accept the most difficult task. "Is he rushing in the direction of the cannibals?" another HQ officer asked incredulously, causing Shikaku and Inoichi to freeze as they looked at another feed. Incredulous, Colonel Inoichi exclaimed, "It can't be." Colonel Shikaku Nara froze in place, not because he saw Ruto 141 charge toward a mob of angry cannibals, but because of the way he moved, which made him think of a close friend and comrade who had passed away years before. Even as the cannibals charged forward to tear Ruto 141 apart limb by limb, they launched a series of spiked projectiles from their tentacles in his direction. The Spartan commander began avoiding the approaching lethal projectiles by literally making tiny teleportation leaps from one location to another. The camera feeds barely captured the speed of the maneuver, which at best appeared as bright red flashes, and further stunned the cannibals, who were unable to follow their target. They paid for their error when Ruto 141 teleported directly in front of the leading cannibal and used his chakra sword to tear it apart from top to bottom. The Spartan kicked the closest cannibal with a roundhouse kick, causing the beast to scream in agony before being reduced to a repulsive mass of blood and flesh on the ground beneath the Spartan's boot. Upon witnessing the death of 2 of their own, the next cannibal leapt wildly in the direction of the monstrous Spartan, but the Oni warrior quickly grabbed the heavy beast by the throat, severed its tentacles, and caused it to scream in pain. With all of his strength, Ruto 141 hurled the dying beast, shattering both tentacles and bones as it crashed into 3 more cannibals. With an even louder roar, the remaining cannibal horde leapt for the lone Spartan in retaliation. Wind style. Razor blades. As many cannibals were blasted apart, leaving behind heads, limbs, or entire body parts, there was a subsequent explosion of blood and guts. "He's going to get Banshee," Mabui was urgently warned. As soon as Shikaku spotted the threat, 2 Banshee fighters flew in to take out the Spartan commander, but one round tore through the cockpit of one of the enemy aircraft, causing it to explode. A similar round ended his life as well, sending both Banshees crashing to the ground and causing more explosions before its wingmen could recover from the loss of their comrade. The 2 colonels and their officers turned to watch the Spartan sniper with renewed interest after she calmly reported, "Skies clear, Noble One," over the open channel. She had made kill shots on fast-moving targets that would have been impossible for experienced snipers to carry out in such a short amount of time over such a long distance. Take a copy. Ruto 141 calmly asked, "Let's finish this, team," while viciously punching the final cannibal to pieces. Even as another wave of arcanid bugs rushed forward, SASUKE 297 completed emptying his assault rifle into the final grunts before rushing quickly in the direction of his squad leader. Majestic Destroyer Flame is the fire style. Sasuke 297 unleashed a huge wall of flames, which Ruto 141's lethal wind combo added to, extending the conflagration in all directions the enemy was approaching. As Ruto, Darui, and Neji, supported by Gaara and Samui, delivered a lethal barrage of firepower that destroyed the remaining members of their opponents if they weren't burned alive in the flames, Pakura 156 joined the assault by hurling several dozen flaming fireballs into the conflagration. The few enemy survivorship, mostly Gruntsa, just dropped their weapons in terror and fled while yelling demons. The entire enemy presence in the western sector was eliminated in less than 7 minutes. Permission to help the other sectors, Colonel Shikaku? Calmly, Ruto 141 asked. I understand, Commander. I'm sending one of my finest squads to help you, Shikaku declared with assurance. Copy, sir. When Kakashi received his next set of orders from Colonel Shikaku, he had still not recovered from the shock of witnessing the slaughter of an entire Otsutsuki division in a matter of minutes. He wants those guys to get help from us, Asuma questioned incredulously. The command doesn't anticipate any more attacks in the near future because this area has essentially been cleaned up. You stay with Obito to help him get better, Yugo. Following me, the rest of the red team will assist the Spartans in clearing out other defensive line sectors in accordance with new directives. The next highest-ranking shock trooper officer still alive gave Kakashi a firm nod when he said, Lieutenant Yamada, you take over command here in my absence. The sound of several weapons being reloaded cut him off, and when he turned to face the direction, he saw that the 2 Spartans were already waiting for him close to their defensive line. Before long, Kakashi was confronted by the remaining members of the noble team, led by their enormous leader. Ruto, Commander. Thank you for the help, Red Team, 10th Shock Troopers Captain Kakashi Hitaki. The tall, green-armored Spartan nodded when Kakashi stated bluntly, we have been tasked with aiding in your next objective. Captain, we're just doing our job. We're happy to have you and your team here, Ruto replied. Kakashi suppressed a scowl at the Spartan's youthful-sounding voice rather than his polite response. He was much too young to have caused the kind of devastation he and his team had just caused. He was uneasy when he looked at these Spartans, not only because of their size or the carnage they could perform in an instant, but also because of the gloomy vibe he got from each one of them. When the normally fearless Anko actually stepped back and her face turned pale as her senses focused on the 2 Spartans from whom the ominous feeling was too strong, the sensors within Kakashi's ranks also sensed it. Who are you? She inquired anxiously. That's classified. Ruto 141's firm response was sufficient to silence Anko and everyone else, including Kakashi, who had too many unanswered questions concerning their new allies. To Noble and Red Team, this is Neptune Actual. An intense Otsutsuki armored assault is causing the southern and eastern lines to collapse. I'd advise you to arrive right away. As Commander Ruto gave Kakashi a serious glance and received a firm nod from the shock trooper captain, Colonel Shikaku's orders silenced any more discussion. Let's go. The Spartans of Noble Team were being led by Kakashi and his red team of the 10th Shock Troopers toward the eastern and southern defensive lines of the New Era Starport Zone. A few Marine squads and the only remaining Nightmare battle tank from the western line, which these Spartans had brutally assisted in securing, joined them. Kakashi, who was still receiving vital intelligence from headquarters on the evolving situation, proposed, we should split our forces in 2, Commander Ruto. Enemy air attacks and heavy armor have nearly decimated every friendly tank and IFVs on the western line, whereas a massive infantry force supported by heavy artillery and sniper fire is crushing the eastern line. NOBLE-2 led a fire team consisting of Nobles 4 and 7 to assist the eastern line, was Naruto's immediate command, receiving a firm nod from Sasuke and acknowledging lights on his HUD from Gaara and Neji, who would accompany him. Kakashi agreed, Asuma, take Anko from our team in Delta, Bravo, and Echo Marine squads to assist Noble 2 and his fire team. His 2 teammates and the corresponding Marine NCOs in charge of their squads quickly nodded in agreement. With a chorus of, yes, responses from the other Marine NCOs, Kakashi ordered, Kurenai and the rest of the Marine squads on me. We will assist Noble 1 and his remaining fire team to clear the southern sector. Same goes for you Butcher -1. As the only nightmare battle tank commander among them, solid copy, Captain Kakashi, sounded. While the rest of Noble left under Sasuke's command along with the 3 marine squads towards the eastern line, Naruto watched as their force began to divide into the decided ranks, with Samui, Pakura, and Darui approaching his flanks. The shock trooper captain couldn't help but feel that these deadly fighters were purposefully maintaining a moderate pace in their run so the rest of the force could keep up, even as Kakashi, Kurenai, the remaining marine squads, and the lone tank trailed behind the rest of Noble team. They could hear a huge gunfight and bombing nearby as they got closer to their destination. Noble-3, you are on Overwatch. Clear the skies of any banshees trying to take us out from air and any hidden snipers, told Naruto. Will be done, Samui resolutely acknowledged. I want all marines to bolster our crumbling defensive line and start tending to our wounded. You must stabilize our defenses, while the rest of Noble under my command alongside Captain Kakashi and Kurenai take the fight to the enemy alongside Butcher 1, instructed Naruto. There was some hesitancy among the other marine NCOs, but they were quick to acknowledge the orders. My sensors are showing there are at least 6 wraiths in the area, alongside at least 8 Banshee aerial units. We will join your charge, Spartan. But it won't be long before my lone tank is obliterated against this much enemy firepower, said the tank commander glumly. Understood, Butcher -1. Spartans will lead the charge and draw as much attention and firepower towards us. You and the shock troopers back us up the best you can, calmly assured Naruto. Kakashi grimly reassured him, we will do what we have to, Noble -1, for as long as we can. The lead NCO of that marine squad, Sergeant Masani, said, the Zulu squad requests to join your frontal assault, Noble -1. You and the shock troopers could use the help. Naruto turned to face him. You sure about this, Sarge? Naruto asked gravely as he turned to face the marines who were pursuing the man. They weren't shinobi. They were just regular people without the capacity to use chakra in battle. Even though they were highly skilled soldiers, they had little chance of surviving against the enemy. All of the Zulu squad's marines gave Sergeant Masani firm nods when he said, these devil dogs are some of the toughest bastards I have served with. We will handle our own and prevent enemy infantry from disrupting you from reaching your main objective, the tanks. Even as he considered the marines' offer, Naruto said nothing. The mixed group of Terran fighters and their lone tank arrived at the southern line encircling the starport, the battlefield's edge, a short while later. Now what remained of it? Across the battlefield, IFVs and a dozen Terran tanks were nothing more than smoking garbage. Under continuous fire from Banshees in the air and Wraith tanks of the Otsutsuki in the rear, 2 companies of enemy infantry were leading an assault on the remaining Terran marines who were fighting to hold the line. 3 platoons of remaining friendly forces, the majority of whom didn't appear to be in good condition, were just about picked up by Naruto's sweet sensors. One direct hit from those tanks and you'll be toast, brat. When Naruto heard the 9-tailed fox's voice, he was taken aback. The beast was not very talkative, but over the course of the previous few months of training, it had progressively given Naruto its power after he demonstrated that he had the strength of will to prevent the fox from taking over his body entirely. What do you have in mind, Fox? I am open to suggestions. Despite the worries about being trapped inside a whiny, weak, or conceited human, Kurama couldn't help but smirk at the response. He had been given a host that was strong enough to hold his own against the strongest Biju, but also had the common sense to listen to advice on the battlefield. Although Kurama would never say it aloud, he found it to be quite acceptable. You'll need more numbers if you want to destroy this enemy force while protecting as many of those weak humans following you. Or else most of them will end up dead even if you are victorious, said Kurama. I cannot use the shadow clone technique openly while it can create copies of me. It cannot replicate a complicated piece of technology like the Hachiman armor I am wearing, and you know we are forbidden from voluntarily showing what's underneath it to anyone, replied Naruto with a scowl. In an angry tone, Kurama asked, humans and their stupid secrets and morality. You are no longer children, but trained killers and warriors. What difference does it make? Those are our orders and I will not break them, was Naruto's firm response. Without hesitation, Kurama asked, how many soldiers are you willing to lose? In an attempt to see and fully comprehend what this Spartan valued more. It saw the boy clench his fist resentfully as the soldier inside him sought to save as many friendly lives as possible, while the trained Spartan inside him struggled to follow orders and conceal the darkest truths of their program. How many, Commander? Kurama inquired gravely once more. None, Kurama could hear the young commander's conviction in his voice, and it was evident in what he said next. Naruto said resolutely, "Help me create a dozen clones with as much chakra, I have an idea." Kurama grinned viciously as the boy explained his plan in detail. This should be interesting. Naruto turned to face the men and women who were following him, and the fox agreed with the idea. The opposition was immediate when Naruto said over a private channel, "Darui, Pakura, Samui, I am implementing the strategy I undertook in training exercise Free Fall, if you remember. That was a training exercise among Spartans, Noble -1. We can't reveal what we are beneath the armor to others," warned Pakura quickly. "I know you want to save as many of those following us, Ruto. But this is crossing a line command has forbidden us from even thinking about," warned Darui. The only one to sigh was Samui, and Naruto could sense her rolling her eyes in frustration even from behind the helmet. "Think you can do it fast enough? Someday your bleeding heart will get you in serious trouble," said Samui with a sigh. Naruto retorted defiantly, "The fox will help make it happen, it thinks this will be interesting." Even if the three Spartans remained motionless, he could sense their surprise because the tailed beasts rarely interacted with their hosts, much less chose to assist voluntarily. Darui smirked and remarked, "I think the fox enjoys the carnage you wreak a little too much." Pakura responded, "Does it matter as long as it helps kill our enemies?" With a sly smile, Kurama said, "Now that one I like, she's a smart brat." Naruto whispered, "Shut up," causing the beast to sigh in frustration. "Then it's decided. I'll lead the charge, Darui, Pakura, when you see the opening, lead the others in following me," determined Naruto. Pakura sighed and said, "You really have a death wish, Ruto." Darui gave a quick laugh, and Samui nodded silently. Naruto turned to face Kakashi, Kurenai, and the other marine squads after the Spartans gave their approval. "I'll lead the charge first, Nobles 5 and 6 will lead you after me when they see the opening I create," said Naruto with simplicity. Sergeant Masani said bluntly, "Sorry for the insubordination, sir, but this is nuts." The decision was made in response to a string of explosions and the terrified cries of their fellow soldiers in the southern line. Then, as Naruto turned to face the battlefield, a terrible surge of chakra consumed his entire armor. Samui was not alone in feeling a strange sense of comfort when she saw her friend and commander give his back to their comrades and his chest to the enemy. He turned to face them all one last time. "Trust me." Samui observed how Kakashi, Kurenai, and all of the Marines in their ranks were affected by that straightforward but sincere request. They were ultimately confident enough to nod in agreement because of Naruto's power and the unwavering resolve in his voice. Naruto leapt down the side of the road that led to the battlefield and charged directly at the adversary. He broadcast on the radio, "Terran forces, friendly forces coming in from the west." Many enemies across the battlefield turned to watch him charge, as did a few Marines in their defensive positions. In addition to the aim of 4 Wraith tanks and dozens of enemy infantry, his hands were already navigating a series of hand signals when 2 Banshees turned toward him. His energy shields began to rapidly deplete under the staccato of plasma fire that came his way from the enemy infantry, while plasma arcs from the Wraith tanks began to land all around him, aiming to turn him to dust even as he increased his speed. When one of the Banshees flying in his direction exploded, a contented smile appeared on his lips. Naruto calmly questioned, "Got my back, Noble 3? The sniper's next explosive round clipped the second Banshee's wing, causing it to lose momentum and crash directly into a sizable group of its own ground forces. "Always," was the calm voice that Samui spoke over his private channel. For the remainder of his force, Naruto annotated his HUD with the locations of as many enemy forces and Wraith tanks as possible. As Naruto made his move, Pakura called out, "Let's go," over their radio channel, eliciting a chorus of battle cries from the Marines and shock trooper pair. Hidden Mist Jutsu. As Naruto made his next hand gesture, a dense fog covered the entire battlefield, making it impossible to see anything for a few seconds. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Around him, a dozen clones materialized, each one with a lot of chakra but lacking the original's armor. Silently, they all vanished quickly in different directions through the dense fog, and a few seconds later, there were several explosions and the sound of the cries of dozens of Otsutsuki species as the clones detonated one after another in a series of suicide attacks. When a few of the clones made it to the Otsutsuki Wraith tanks and destroyed at least 3 of them, there were massive explosions everywhere. However, the mist quickly vanished as a result of the massive explosions, and Naruto found himself surrounded by 4 grunts and 3 large Newers. With eagerness, Kurama exclaimed, "Tear them apart, brat." even as he blew the brains out of two nearby grunts and delivered clean head shots from the pistol in his left hand. Naruto's chakra sword, laced with wind chakra, had already clashed with the first Nuer's energy sword, which was intended to cut his head off. He leapt wildly into the air, gave the offending Nuer a crushing kick that broke his rib cage, and then used the momentum to propel himself backwards. He then turned in midair to reverse sweep his chakra sword, severing the head of another Nuer who was attempting to attack him from behind. He grabbed the severed head and hurled it at the two grunts that were still alive. They screamed in fear and then in pain when Naruto's grenade inside their severed head exploded, shattering them into pieces. With a fierce roar, the final Nuer charged fearlessly in his direction. Jump far left. Naruto trusted the fox's warning and leapt to the left, just in time to see a flying plasma bomb fall on the spot where he was going to face the final Nuer. Although the blast reduced his shields to less than 20%, Naruto was at least still alive, unlike the Nuer, who just vanished. He squinted to see that the final three Wraith tanks had all begun firing quickly and aiming at him. When Naruto reached the back of one of the Wraith tanks, he switched to his assault rifle and fired the incendiary rounds, quickly dodging the incoming balls of plasma to save himself. He threw a grenade directly into the back of the tank and leapt as it exploded in a fiery explosion, launching suppressive fire over two Nuer attempting to close in on him. As he came under plasma fire from the grunt gunners on the remaining Wraith tanks, his recharging shields began to wear down even more. Scorch release. Great steaming explosive blast. As Pakura joined the battle, a giant flaming orb struck one of the Wraith tanks directly, causing it to be completely destroyed in a massive explosion. The lone Terran Nightmare tank fired a powerful round that blasted the last tank apart before it could zero in on her. Captain Kakashi appeared behind Pakura, dove directly at a Nuer that was closing in on Naruto, and drove his lightning-laced hand right through its heart. Chidori. Not far behind, Kurenai had already used her genjutsu to confuse the next Nuer's visual perception before filling his body with bullet holes. Several remaining enemy forces were blasted by the deadly barrage of gunfire that Sergeant Masani and his Zulu Marine squad unleashed as they charged in without fear. Along with his allies, Naruto entered the battle and began sweeping up the waning enemy ground forces. BUTCHER-1, Noble 6. Remaining Banshees are closing in on the team. I am designating targets. On my mark, take them down, said Samui. Tank Commander. Acknowledged, Noble 3. The Nightmare tank and Darui had stayed in the back when they noticed the 6 Banshees making a direct bombing run in the direction of their allies. A fiery explosion resulted from Samui's opening salvo, which struck one of the Banshee's wings, causing it to flip and crash directly into its wingman. After locking onto another Banshee, the Nightmare tank fired a powerful round that destroyed it and, in the explosion that followed, killed another Banshee. By then, Darui had completed his hand signals and attacked on his own. Gale style. Laser circus. Darui unleashed a dozen enormous lightning bolts that struck the final 2 Banshees head-on, instantly frying many of their systems and causing them to lose their ability to fly before crashing to the ground in flaming explosions. Noble 1. Mop up enemies. Noble 2 and his fire team have already repelled the enemies on the eastern line. He just sent in a confirmation, said Samui irritably. With a smile of amusement, Naruto thought, damn, Sasuke is fast. He landed on the remaining enemy infantry with renewed vigor. Otsutsuki flagship, Fleet of Annihilation, Dark Silence. When an Otsutsuki supercarrier was assigned to command a whole fleet, the atmosphere was frequently one of discipline and obedience from the well-trained crew as they performed their assigned tasks exactly as they were supposed to. For everyone, regardless of status or importance, the consequences would be worse than death if they did anything less. On the bridge, however, the command officers stood in grim silence with their heads bowed before their fleet admiral, demonstrating how the once controlled atmosphere had now descended into unspoken dread. Their frightened hearts refused to gaze upon the Supreme Commander and Fleet Admiral's magnificent yet equally terrifying face sitting on her throne in icy rage. When Nisana Otsutsuki saw the fear in the hearts of her officers from different slave species, she had to control herself and suppress her disappointment because it was something she had never seen before and could only indicate that something had gone terribly wrong. The commander of their ground forces engaged in combat on the planet side finally looked up in terror as she asked coldly, "What has happened?" A strong newer officer, Major General Orvam Kaylee, had commanded several dozen campaigns during this 10-year conflict with the rodents known as humanity. His faith in his legion's Otsutsuki masters was unmatched, and they had won every battle. The powerful Newer had never appeared so concerned in the many years he had served Nisana. Orvam reluctantly reported, "We have lost 4 legions planetside in a matter of hours, Supreme Commander," and immediately bowed his head in shame. Standing close to 6 feet tall, Nisan was a tall, attractive, pale-skinned Otsutsuki. She possessed the same gentle facial features as all Otsutsuki women, including round, short eyebrows and crystal-white eyes that demonstrated her nobility. Her womanly figure was well-rounded, like every Otsutsuki noble who demanded nothing less than the besta for themselves or everything they dedicated themselves to, and her full red lips stood out sharply against her long, pale hair that reached her back. At just 2,418 years old, she was hardly a maiden and one of the youngest to be in charge of an entire fleet, making many of her peers envious, in contrast to her more seasoned clansmen participating in military operations throughout the empire. After the string of victories she consistently delivered against humanity, those old fools had nothing to complain about. She didn't really have a choice, especially after her own brother, Fleet Admiral Kido Otsutsuki, had just presiding over their empire's only loss to humanity in the Battle of Freedom. Before Nisana personally asked their high command to give her a chance to regain their honor, a request that was hardly granted. Akido's shame had almost caused her entire family to perish. After their catastrophic loss at Freedom, their military council was humiliated in front of the emperor, and for the first time in many millennia, their faith in their own superiority was called into question. The Newer were the last race to present a defeat to their unbeatable empire almost a millennium ago, and that defeat at the human world of Freedom was far worse. By leading her own fleet against the blasted colony of humanity, Nisana had rescued her family and reclaimed the honor of her overconfident deceased brother. It was impossible for humanity to defend the world because she had severely damaged Admiral Tobarama's fleet, the man she was facing today at Ngan. She had ordered the slaughter of every remaining human being on Freedom when the human fleet fled, and she had completely destroyed the planet, rendering it uninhabitable for all eternity. Humanity's renewed hope of ever defeating the Otsutsuki Empire had been shattered by it. Nisan was harshly reprimanded. "You are telling me you lost more than 100,000 troops in such a short span of time against humanity? I hope you are not joking, Orvam." Although her immaculate face did not even flinch, her murderous intent caused many of her officers to drop to their knees and clutch their chests in excruciating pain. Although he was not immune, Major General Orvam resisted the other weaklings and turned to face her regretfully. In a somber tone, Orvam declared, "Humanity has deployed new special operations forces across the planet. These soldiers are tearing our forces apart." He directed one of his subordinates to swiftly pull a video feed across the bridge. "Intercepted enemy communications have given us intel these new troops are called Spartans." Nisana squinted at one of the several video feeds on her screen that showed the Battle of New Era, the capital of Ngan and the most significant city that needed to be destroyed with the utmost discrimination. Her heart froze when she saw the Spartans unleash a huge chakra bomb that destroyed one of her divisions. She also saw these warriors for the first time when she landed on the ground. These soldiers demonstrated their mettle by committing a ruthless massacre. They were taller than the majority of humans on the planet and had physiques comparable to those of most Newer. Even the ferocious cannibals were brutally and precisely dispatched. When she saw the biggest Spartan in green armor advancing to confront the cannibals, her eyes widened a little. She was reminded of the human who had caused the Otsutsuki's lone loss to the Terran Federation by his quick charge. Before personally destroying millions of their slaves, ships, and priceless clansmen in a nuclear fire, a human soldier who had engaged a whole company of Otsutsuki warriors head-on killed dozens of their ranks in a single battle. One of them was dubbed the Yellow Flash by the Otsutsuki, but their slaves had nicknamed it something scarier. The lone grunt major on her bridge muttered nervously, "He moves like the demon of freedom, Supreme Commander." Because it was dangerous to find another grunt who could keep his vermin clansmen in line like this one could, Nisana had to hold back from destroying the cowardly idiot. However, like his entire race, this one was also a coward at heart. Instead, she tried to draw everyone's focus to this new foe by asking, "What kind of name is Spartan?" The bits and pieces our officers have been able to secure from human history records on Ngan are faint hints of a small city-state on the human homeworld, Earth. It was called Sparta, and its warriors refused the rule of shinobi in the early days of human conquest of their own homeworld. 1,000 of their warriors known as Spartans engaged in a final but doomed battle with the shinobi nations. They were massacred to the last man but were undefeated for nearly half a month and took thousands of shinobi to their graves despite the Spartans not wielding the holy power of chakra. The shinobi respected their bravery enough to allot them a place in their history at the very least as a worthy foe, fairly. Nisana was a little interested because whoever had made and trained these new Spartans had thoroughly researched human history. It was evident to that individual that the present military might of humanity was insufficient to prevent the Otsutsuki from annihilating every human settlement they encountered. She muttered, a small smile on her face, so you recreated your old foes to hold the line a little longer for you, not that it would help much in the end. How simplistic. Orvum's question, Supreme Commander, brought Nisana's focus back to her officers. The games stop here. Prepare our fleet to move into a spindle formation to neutralize the enemy fleet. Tell our groundside forces to hold their ground no matter the cost, and call our backup quick reaction force to jump in over Ngan and burn the planet to the ground. They want these Spartans to hold the line, but we will obliterate it entirely, instructed Nisana icily. When the officers, including Orvum, heard their new directives, they were quite pleased. Following the loss at the human colony of Freedom, High Command decided that a small percentage of each Otsutsuki fleet should always be kept in reserve in case the situation worsened or a message needed to be sent to the enemy informing them of their doomed fates. The Spartans were a demonstration of humanity's might and a message to them. It was only right to return the favor. Ngan. New Era, the planetary capital. Since shock troopers were the best shinobi humanity had to offer in their fight against the Otsutsuki Empire, Colonel Shikaku Nara had always taken great pride in his role as one. Humanity had always relied on its shock troopers to provide an answer, regardless of how dire or unachievable the problem. The only human victory in this war had been won by the shock troopers under Minato Namikaze, but it was evident from the feeds on his video screens that humanity now had even more deadly fighters to protect itself. It was easy to hear the relief and surprise in his voice as his longtime friend, Colonel Inoichi Yamanaka of the 22nd Shock Troopers, reported, all enemy presence neutralized across the entire starport zone, Shikaku. As Shikaku examined the thousands of charred and mangled enemy corpses scattered in various directions throughout the starport, he remarked thoughtfully, the Spartans did what they promised and more. Thousands of soldiers from an entire Otsutsuki division had been slaughtered. Shikaku and Inoichi's Terran forces were greatly energized by the few fortunate Otsutsuki forces that managed to escape, who were in full retreat from the starport. We can deploy the Spartans next in eliminating the enemy resistance in the city's northern sector. The 43rd Shock Trooper Battalion needs all the help they can get to stave of enemy advance in their area, Inoichi confidently stated. Shikaku asked gravely, looking at the dark-skinned female staff officer for a response. We don't have authority over the Spartans, Inoichi. Only Admiral Toburama does. We were lucky enough to get these Spartans to defend the starport. Mabui, any word from the Admiral? When Admiral Toburama appeared on their holoscreen a few moments later, Shikaku and Inoichi both quickly rose from their seats and saluted. Admiral Toburama, sir. We're happy to report that the New Era starport zone is completely secure and we are ready to begin civilian evacuation operations, Shikaku confidently stated. Shikaku or Inoichi didn't anticipate a joyful response from a strict leader like Toburama, but they did anticipate a very concerned expression in the Admiral's eyes. Toburama flatly retorted, I heard, Colonel. Nice job holding the line until Spartan reinforcements arrived. Toburama grimaced as Inoichi asked gravely, how's it looking up there, sir? I'm getting the feeling you are concerned about something. A stalemate for now, our refined ship armor and weapons are giving us a minor edge, but we were already losing too many of our own vessels against the enemy fleet. At least planetside the situation is different. Ona's Spartans are a game changer. Enemy forces across the entire planet are facing great setbacks wherever Spartan forces have landed. Admiral Orochimaru has given us a decisive edge, Toburama candidly stated. With a desperate hope that Shikaku also shared, Inoichi questioned, there are more of these Spartans on Ngan? Quite a few. When they learned that one squad of these Spartans could almost defeat an entire Otsutsuki division, both colonels were taken aback. With proper use and a little much-needed luck, these Spartans might be able to help the Terran Federation defeat the Otsutsuki for the second time. I appreciate everything your soldiers and Spartans have done. However, I'm afraid that this will force you to leave the capital, Toburama said solemnly. The two colonels were shown a fresh video feed on their holograms before they could respond. When they saw more enemy ships leaping close to the planet of Ngan, their eyes widened in shock and despair. However, rather than joining their main fleet brethren in combat with the Fifth Fleet, led by Toburama, these new arrivals headed straight for the planet itself. Since the Spartans entered the conflict, the enemy has also come to the same conclusion as you. I sincerely apologize for not having enough ships to prevent this new fleet from launching a full-scale attack on the planet, but their reinforcements have arrived to crush us all. I run the risk of further eroding my already tenuous position against the main enemy fleet and possibly collapsing if I commit more of my battleships to your cause. A tiny percentage of these new ships are en route to New Era in order to retake the city and murder everyone who is still alive. We don't have much time left before they get here, so I can send out the evacuation ships to save as many of your men and the Spartans as possible, Tobirama said sourly. Admiral, what about the citizens in the city who are awaiting evacuation? We cannot allow the slaughter of 25 million innocent people. Tobirama clenched his fist as Inoichi argued incredulously. We have no other choice. I don't want to abandon our people to perish, but if we want to prevent a complete disaster, I need your soldiers to live longer than the civilians, pointing reluctantly at Tobirama. Refusing to give up so easily, Inoichi turned to Shikaku for support. However, after a few long seconds of grim silence, he turned back to the admiral and saw his friend and fellow officer standing there. Admiral, I recognize the circumstances and your point. However, how will this even work if there isn't much time left to evacuate even all of our soldiers? Seriously, Shikaku asked. We might not have enough time to evacuate every soldier. In a somber tone, Tobirama acknowledged, some will have to stay behind and buy time for the others to escape. Shikaku clenched his jaw at the thought of having to abandon all of his soldiers to perish with millions of defenseless civilians. When faced with greater odds in the Battle of Freedom, he couldn't help but think of the decision made by his late friend, Lieutenant Colonel Minato Namikaze of the 7th Shock Troopers Battalion. And the results of that decision are what happened. Are additional reinforcements likely to arrive soon, Admiral? Simply put, Shikaku asked. I have informed Supreme Commander Madara of the recent development. Although he has promised more 4th Fleet reinforcements, they won't be there for at least 2 days. By then, it will be too late for your forces in the capital, Tobirama replied candidly. Before I share my honest opinions with you, Admiral, I would like to know what Noble Team thinks of this situation. They have played a significant role in enabling us to accomplish everything we have thus far. It is only fitting that we involve them in this decision-making process, Shikaku stated gravely. Admiral Tobirama gazed at him for a very long time, but Shikaku didn't bat an eye, and Inoichi joined him in supporting that call, which caused their leader to nod wearily at last. As soon as Mabui finished the preparations, the holographic image of Ruto 141, the commander of Noble Team, and the rest of his team appeared on the screen. The Spartans gave a firm salute to Tobirama and the colonels, which the admiral, Inoichi, and Shikaku all returned. Noble, you truly fulfilled your promise. Naruto turned to face the 2 shock trooper battalion leaders as Tobirama said gravely, you have saved many lives with your actions, but there is a situation that has taken place and Colonels Shikaku and Inoichi over here want your opinion on it. Admiral Tobirama really wanted to see how the colonels were reacting to the situation, but his helmets made it impossible. However, after Shikaku finished explaining, he noticed that they were all staring at one another for a brief moment. How do you feel, Commander? Tobirama inquired inquisitively. Admiral, we are to obey your orders and do everything within our power to protect this planet. I recognize the circumstances and concur with your logic, but we cannot allow the deaths of numerous fellow soldiers and millions of innocent civilians. Noble will confront the enemy and delay the arrival of reinforcements or the escape of as many soldiers and civilians as possible. Naruto firmly responded, that is our opinion, to which the rest of his team gave him curt nods. Incredulity was evident on Tobirama's face as well as the faces of the command center staff officers. Commander, I genuinely respect your bravery and am now confident in your team's abilities. But you're asking for a suicide mission. Although you performed remarkably well in your first battle, your squad will perish if you make this choice. Do you know what you're requesting? Tobirama inquired sincerely. When Shikaku and Inoichi learned that the super soldiers who had saved their lives were basically inexperienced in combat, they were even more shocked. Sir, we understand what loss is. We stand by our opinion because we have already lost far too much, Naruto replied solemnly. The admiral and the other officers in the command center, such as Colonels Shikaku and Inoichi, had not anticipated this response. Some of them stood firmly behind their commander's decision while glancing at the other noble Spartans on the holoscreen. Shikaku saw no hesitation or fear in a single Spartan, even with their faces hidden behind helmets. Admiral Tobirama, however, was not completely persuaded and expressed his views bluntly. Compared to the main fleet that I am fighting, this new enemy fleet group is smaller. Considering the enormous losses the Otsutsuki are suffering on the ground, it's likely that a quick reaction force was sent out when you first arrived on the planet. With a heavy frown on his pale face, Tobirama remarked, The only way to stop this new fleet from using their might to reduce Ngan to rubble is to somehow increase the pressure in the space battle on the main enemy fleet, forcing these new reinforcements to rush to their aid instead of focusing on destroying the planet. Sir, that is a very high order. Naruto pointed out carefully, but I have an idea considering the capabilities of some of his Spartans, but I am not authorized to disclose those capabilities in detail. Admiral Orochimaru can, I suppose? Tobirama cleverly asked, receiving only a quick nod from the Spartan commander. We barely sent a ship back to notify Supreme Commander Madara of our predicament and request reinforcements because communications are constantly being jammed in the ongoing battle. Orochimaru's clearance will not be available to me in time. Tobirama, fed up with all the secrecy when millions of lives were on the line, said sourly. Naruto was well aware of the problem. The Spartan in him had been taught to keep their program's secrets to himself, but given the circumstances, could he really have made such a choice? Admiral Tobirama watched with interest as Naruto turned his head slightly in the direction of a Spartan in blue armor, who was most likely his second in command. This is noble too. Admiral, second in command, and Lieutenant Commander Sasuke. We recognize your predicament, but disclosing our actual capabilities without the appropriate permission from Oni Command is, at most, punishable by death. Sasuke calmly proposed. The best we can do is to outline our course of action and hope you can trust us to carry it out. The minor revelation shocked Tobirama, Inoichi, and Shikaku even more, leading them to question what Oni had actually done to create these Spartans. Tobirama sighed and conceded, given the situation, I would like to hear your plan. Sir, may I enter the fleet formations and space battle? As he sent a request from his HUD to the flagship, which the admiral quickly approved, Naruto asked. To ensure that Shikaku, Inoichi, and the rest of the noble team were all in agreement, Tobirama even projected the situation onto the holoscreens located throughout the command center. When Sasuke noticed that Tobirama and the other high officers were staring at Naruto with curiosity, he chose to respond to their unspoken query. Only a small percentage of our members are qualified to pilot spacecraft, no more than frigates and cruisers. In contrast, Sasuke acknowledged that Ruto 141 had attained the rank of commander and was skilled in both space combat and special operations on the ground, which caused Tobirama to raise an inquisitive eyebrow. So, Commander, how would you rate the enemy's strategy? Tobirama was challenged because he wanted to see how strong those very capabilities were. Enemy movements suggest they are planning to break through our fleet center. Their recent movements suggest preparation for such an action, replied Naruto with honesty. Tobirama was a little impressed by the evaluation, but he kept his emotions to himself as he stared at the Spartan commander. The armored Spartan somehow reminded him of someone he knew. To stop the enemy from tearing us apart, I have a plan to counter that, and my fleet commanders are trained to carry out the maneuver once it occurs. As Tobirama displayed a simulated strategy on the holoscreen, he explained in detail, what we lack is enough firepower and ships to devastate the enemy fleet once we seize the advantage. Inside his helmet, Naruto's eyes widened in surprise as he recognized the deceit and complexity of such a countermaneuver. However, you stated that the enemy fleet continues to obstruct our encrypted fleet communications, sir. How are you going to get these orders to all of our ship captains in a timely manner without the enemy figuring out our strategy? Curiously, Naruto asked, causing Tobirama to grin. In order to direct our ship captains and commanders to access an encrypted plan of action codenamed Z41 on their respective ship's tactical intelligence system, we broadcast a compressed data transmission across all frequencies. Before we started this battle, I made sure that every ship in my fleet had that file for a scenario like this. Tobirama cleverly clarified, if that's all we say, the enemy won't understand anything, even if they are watching our communications. When Naruto, the noble team, and Colonels Shikaku and Inoichi discovered how much foresight Admiral Tobirama Senju had to have planned ahead of time, they were all humbled. His role in defeating the Otsutsuki fleet during the Battle of Freedom was just as significant as the sacrifices made by all of the soldiers and sailors, including Minato and Kushina. Naruto looked straight at the Admiral, and it only strengthened his own resolve. Admiral, it's a good plan. We're all dead, though, if our men don't move the way we want them to in time. However, there is nothing we can do but proceed. As he entered the required information into the tactical computer of the flagship, Naruto confidently explained, by doing this, we can be the hammer in this operation. Tobirama and the other officers observed the human fleet carrying out the maneuver that Tobirama had prepared, while the enemy fleet swiftly realized it and countered. Then an unforeseen event occurred that neither the Otsutsuki nor humanity could have anticipated. Commander, is this really possible? For this, how many men would you need? asked Tobarama, his voice strained with a mixture of disbelief and hope. 12 of our ships, along with a few Spartans, have little chance of surviving. The same is true for me and my men, Naruto replied candidly. Hearing that, Tobarama's heart stopped feeling hopeful, and he took a long, hard look at the Spartan commander. You're going to personally oversee this operation? Tobarama inquired startledly. For the mission to have any chance of success, it is essential. I am one of the few Spartans who, for secret reasons, are regarded as the strongest in our entire force. Together, we can strike the enemy with a blow that they won't be able to quickly recover from, giving your fleet the opportunity to eliminate them, Admiral, Naruto replied bluntly. The new enemy ships that arrive on the planetside can be boarded by the remaining Spartans on the ground. We will try to control them and use them against the enemy, as we are trained for such missions, but if that is not possible, it would be best to destroy the ships. Therefore, in order to destroy as many enemy ships as possible, we would ask to be granted access to any tactical nuclear weapons that are still in use throughout Ngan, Sasuke suggested without hesitation. Shikaku hesitantly remarked, that's a one-way trip even for many among your ranks, noble too, which caused Sasuke to turn to face him. Sasuke calmly retorted, we all make it sooner or later, Colonel. Admiral Tobarama, Shikaku, and Inoichi were a little surprised by that serene acceptance of death, and they were even more intrigued when they noticed that many members of the noble team bowed their heads slightly in response to Sasuke's remarks. Commander Rudo hesitantly said, Sasuke. And the other officers noticed for the first time that the always composed Spartan commander's voice carried a trace of concern. The sight of Sasuke placing a firm yet tender hand on Rudo's shoulder piqued their interest even more. Commander, we must save Ngan. If we fail, we won't be able to look into the eyes of the fallen. As they recalled their own fallen comrades who had given their lives for the sake of humanity's future, Naruto's words caused him to bow his head and struck a deep chord with Colonel Shikaku and Inoichi. Admiral Tobarama even cast a solemn look. Commander Rudo looked up after a moment, and he gave Sasuke and the other members of Noble Team a firm nod. Then proceed and complete the necessary tasks. I'll follow suit, Naruto said solemnly as he tightly clasped Sasuke's hand in his own. Colonel Shikaku interrupted them with a slight cough. The Spartans won't be by themselves in this. Shikaku sincerely pledged, I will use my finest shock trooper platoons to support Noble Team in these shipboarding operations. Colonel Inoichi nodded respectfully, assuring him, as will I. Admiral Tobarama also nodded when he saw the unity and camaraderie among the finest of humanity's special forces. Commander Rudo, the colonels are correct. I will direct any available shock trooper, marine, army, and air forces throughout the planet to support any Spartan team participating in enemy shipboarding operations planetside because it would be improper to leave the Spartans to bear this burden alone. This mission is our only chance to hold the line and save as many lives as possible until reinforcements arrive, so everyone must be on board. Additionally, I am approving the transfer of any tactical nuclear weapons that are available to Spartan teams for the same purpose. Regarding the space battle, we will proceed to combine your strategy with my counterplan. The ships you require will be available to you. Tobarama evenly advised, please let me know which Spartans will be involved in this mission so I can order their evacuation from the planet back to our fleet on priority. As the Admiral and the two shock trooper colonels nodded reassuringly, and Sasuke gave him a firm squeeze on the shoulder, Naruto couldn't help but stare at them in stunned silence, strengthening his own resolve. With gratitude, Naruto said, we are in your debt, sirs, and bowed slightly. All of us are fighting this battle together until the very end. Let's see to it that all of our fallen know their sacrifice was not in vain. Admiral Tobarama was resolutely encouraged. The only reaction required was the sharp salutes he received from everyone in attendance.
So this was it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, we weeb offline.